alongside our speaker, Alexandra Solomon. As people are settling in here, we're upwards of about 700 people. Please know that we have about 18,000 people registered for this event. So you're in high demand, Alexandra. Everyone, please, just a couple housekeeping things as you settle in here. Q&A will be on, but it'll take a few minutes here. So give us a good 5 minutes or so before you jump in. But please do ask questions. When we designed this event alongside Alexandra, we wanted it to be as inclusive as possible and as interactive as possible. To that end, there's also polls that are coming out from the administrator, the Zoom administrator, on behalf of Alexandra. So please participate in those as well so that she can tailor the content to meet your needs and know who she's speaking to. With that in mind, and handouts, they are on your portal now. So do feel free to go back to your PESI account. They are there to follow along with her presentation. So any other things that come up, please put them in the chat. We have people behind the scenes ready to help. So with that being said, I'd love to introduce our speaker, Dr. Alexandra Solomon. She is a clinical psychologist, couples therapist, and one of the most trusted voices in relationships. You know that because you're here to see her by the 18,000 of you. She is on faculty at Northwestern University and also is practicing there at their institute and is the author of 3 books now, Taking Sexy Back, Loving Bravely, and her newest one, Love Every Day, which is what a lot of our content today is based on. Yes, you have it too. It's such a beautiful book. And it's all really centered around one of her cornerstone concepts, which is relational self-awareness. And so much of that is about being curious and compassionate toward ourselves as we figure out the how and the why of showing up in relationships. So thank you so much, Alexandra, for being here. We're thrilled to have you as always. I'll let you take the floor and I'll see you in time for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Kate. It is always a pleasure to work alongside PESI and all of the good work that they do caring for all of us clinicians so that we can care for the clients that we are serving. So I'm happy to be with you all today. You're going to have to give me that little awkward moment where I got to share my screen. Okay, here we are. From the start. Okay. I know Kate already held it up, but I mean, I got to hold her up again. This is, PESI and I and my team worked together so closely, and Kate was right there every step of the way, creating this beautiful book that I'm just so glad to have out in the world, 365 relational self-awareness lessons to get you through a whole year, to get your clients through a whole year. And I got to just brag on the navy blue bookmark. It's just such a beautiful book. It came out so beautifully, and it's here in the world, and it's right next to me. It's never far from my reach. So I love that you all have chosen to spend the afternoon with me. We're going to go for an hour and a half. I'm going to fill your brains and your heart, give you a break, 15-minute break at the halfway mark, come back and do 15 minutes of Q&A, give you another hour of content and application, and then we'll spend some more time in Q&A. So we're talking about relational self-awareness tools that can help our clients transform problematic patterns from their past to create thriving, intimate partnerships today. And it was really helpful to me to do that little poll in the beginning and to know how many of you are working in an individual context with clients. The numbers looked like it was about half and half, about the vast majority of you. There are many more of you working with individual clients than with couples. And for those of you who are working with individual clients, it's about split between clients who are dating and clients who are partnered. And I think everything we cover today is going to be tools that you can bring into those conversations, because whether you're sitting with the system in your office or one client in your office, I really want you to be thinking systemically. So that's really what we're going to be doing for the next 3 hours and 15 minutes here. So Kate already gave me a lovely intro. My career moved between these 3 corners of the triangle. I teach and train clinicians like this. I spent many years training marriage and family therapy graduate students at Northwestern to do couples therapy. I continue to teach an undergraduate class called Building Loving and Lasting Relationships, Marriage 101 at Northwestern University. I do lots of therapy with individuals and couples at all stages of life and relationship development. And then I spend an awful lot of my time translating clinical wisdom and academic content, research, clinical wisdom to tools for the general public in the form of self-help books, in the form of my Instagram feed and social media feed, and in the form of a weekly podcast called Reimagining Love. So I really love, I feel like each of the corners of that triangle really informs the others. But being a clinician educator is definitely one of my favorite hats that I get to wear. So here's the obligatory PESI slide that this content is based on theoretical information and a review of the research. The relational self-awareness framework has been published in Family Process. You have a copy of that article. We'll talk about that in a moment, but it's not been tested over time across settings, and that, the benefits outweigh the risks. Okay, our plan. We're going to talk about relational self-awareness. We're going to talk about how to really understand what I call your client's love template, the sort of internal landscape of their relationship to relationships. How do you get to know what that is? How do you help your client develop a deep, thick narrative of who they have been relationally, who they are relationally, and what their growing edges are and where they want to go relationally? So we'll spend some time there. I'm going to teach you my favorite tool that really helps us hold on to the intra-psychic, what's happening within our client, and the interpersonal, what's happening between our client and their partner or their potential partner. That's when our brains will be full. We'll do a little break. We'll do some Q&A. Then we're going to come back together and we're going to kind of use everything that we've learned to talk about two themes that I hear a lot about in my work, and I imagine that you do too. One of them is pace discrepancies, when we've got a client who, has their foot on the accelerator on a commitment sequence and their partner has got their foot on the brake, or vice versa, and how to work with pace discrepancies. And these are going to be tools that you can bring whether you've got one of them in the room or both of them in the room. Okay, these thumbs up and hearts are just getting all my little dopamine receptors in the best way. So keep that coming, because I am, currently just a lady in a conference room here. So I love just knowing that you're there. Oh, that's so sweet. Okay, then we're going to talk about relational resentment. What does relational resentment say in terms of, oh my gosh, look at those hearts and the little doo-doo-doo-doo. We'll talk about relational resentment, and we'll have time for one more Q&A. And that is our plan. Okay, you can take the professor out of the university, but you cannot take the university out of the professor. So I've given you more than you really probably ever wanted or needed. But here's what you've got waiting for you in the portal: the slide deck as a PDF, a sort of 3 per page PDF, which is newly in there because I tormented PESI by saying, I can get it to you Monday morning because I like to spend all my time tweaking until the very last moment, but that is in there now and yours for the rest of your days. We made you a 20-something page worksheet packet. I love a worksheet. Again, you can take the nerd out of the university, but she's going to nerd wherever she goes. So you've got some of my very favorite worksheets. Many of them are tied to Reimagining Love episodes. And information in there about how to keep in touch with me during the newsletter and all kinds of other ways that we can keep in touch with each other. And then you've got some articles that you'll hear me reference throughout our afternoon together. These are academic articles, but they're, I think, probably all from Family Process, or almost all from Family Process, which is the academic journal that I turn to most frequently, because these are all kind of thought pieces, like really rich kind of clinician, thought pieces that are designed for the clinician. So you've got all those now in your portal to have for reference and for ongoing conversation. Okay, so relational self-awareness. This has been, because I'm on that triangle all the time, I really have needed to develop a set of modular tools that I can kind of pull together depending on where I am and who I'm working with. So, and it also, relational self-awareness really captures the way that I think and the way that I practice and the way that I teach, which is super duper integratively. So you'll see in a moment what sort of threads in our field come together around relational self-awareness. But what relational self-awareness is, it's an ongoing, curious and compassionate relationship that we develop with ourselves that serves as a foundation for a happy and healthy, intimate partnership. It's becoming what we are seeking. It is about developing a nuanced understanding of our relationship to relationships. And so certainly that is about trauma history, and that is about attachment styles. It is also about the roles we played in our family of origin and how early experiences linger with us and either constrict us or open us. It's you'll hear there's a lot of like narrative threads about telling the story of who we had to be when we were little, but who we get to be now. And so it is a process, a sort of a set of tools that we can bring in our clinical work to help our clients. The goal is to help our clients develop their own deepened understanding of who they are relationally. So this approach, I mean, I stand on the shoulders of giants. I've been doing this work for 20 plus years. I have been a conference nerd my whole time. I've been on the psychotherapy network or faculty for many years, and I go because I love teaching, but I also go because I could listen to my most treasured teachers go over material again and again and again. So I'm fully aware that I am just part of this flow of brilliance that we have in our field. And I have, so you'll hear elements of the Family Institute at Northwestern. Our model there is called integrative systemic therapy. It's a bringing together of lots of models, emotion-focused therapy, of course, interpersonal neurobiology, psychodynamic psychotherapy, which is my very first language, and then feminist and multicultural approaches as well. Okay, when we are sitting with a client, I want us to be forever tightening and widening our lens of analysis. We've got to be able to obviously work with our client or our clients' intrapsychic world, helping them understand what emotions feel like inside of their bodies, what linguistic labels to give their emotions, how to understand their thoughts, right? Taking that data that is internal and helping our clients develop a language for the internal and sharing that with us and with each other. Essential. Whether or not we have both of them in the room, I want us always to be looking at the system, the systemic dynamics, what happens in the space between our client and their partner. And then the ways in which cultural socialization is, the water that we swim in or the air that we breathe, and to be able to develop that kind of discernment and to bring gender and race and sexuality and spirituality explicitly in, and what are the ways in which that constricts or expands the possibilities right now in this conversation. So as our clients develop relational self-awareness, this is for our clients who are, no matter what stage of relationship. The more relational self-awareness we have, the more we create possibilities for intimacy and presence and sort of a sense of thriving in our relationships. That is true, but especially for our single clients. I don't want our single clients to think that they have to just do a 6-month deep dive with you and read this book and listen to the podcast and then date, because there's a piece of this. It is introspection in the service of intimacy again and again and again, right? We don't do navel gazing for the sake of navel gazing. Our introspection is in the service of our relationships. So there are pieces and parts of our healing that we access as we deepen into intimate partnership. So that's that really permission-giving piece that, yes, relational self-awareness is key. And your next relationship is going to still kick your booty. It's going to, as we say in Love Every Day, it's like shaking a snow globe. And so I think that that's a really important piece that I want you to keep in mind as a therapist. And I want you to be explicit with your clients about that a good job in therapy with you does not mean that the next relationship is easy breezy, right? There's no sort of riding off into the sunset, but what we're doing is developing increasing capacity to toggle between my perspective and your perspective to hold our partner in warm regard. And so it is the romantic relationship, then the experiences there, the activation, the ways in which I now have to revisit, issues I worked out with my therapist as I fall in love again, that then again deepens relational self-awareness. So that's just that kind of back and forth there. And this is like systems thinking 101, called the golden equation of love. My stuff plus your stuff equals our stuff. We know this. We know that every major approach to couples therapy has got to have a way of helping clients develop systemic thinking, that I bring a set of patterns and blind spots and tender spots into this relationship, and so do you. And invariably, they're going to commingle and create our relationship dynamics. We know that our clients are not honoring the golden equation of love when one of two things is in the room with us: blame and shame, right? Blame says your stuff equals our stuff. Shame says my stuff equals our stuff. And so from the first swipe to the 25th year of marriage, we can be applying the golden equation of love. Now, when you only have one client in the room, especially if you're talking about kind of an early dating scenario, you as a therapist are going to have to do some hypothesizing about what, the other person's stuff is, because you don't have access to that. But you can still bring that hypothesizing. What do you think might be going on inside of them? You can still be playing in this systemic frame, even when you only have one client in the room. In fact, I think it's essential that you do. So, as I said just a moment ago, back in 2014, Sprinkle, Davis, and LeBeau came together to write about common factors in couple and family therapy. They identified 4. They looked across, EFT and integrative behavioral cognitive therapy and psychodynamic couples therapy. They looked across all the models of couples therapy, and they found that no matter whose branch of the couples therapy tree you are practicing from, every approach to couples therapy does these 4 things. There has to be a way to expand the therapeutic alliance, right? A couples therapist has to develop a relationship with each client and with the couple as a whole. Expand the direct treatment system because you've got more than one person in the room. Disrupt dysfunctional relational patterns. Every approach has got to have a way of disrupting dysfunctional relational patterns, and different approaches prioritize that or have different language and tools for it. And then every approach to couples therapy has a process whereby the couples therapist is helping the couple conceptualize their difficulties in relational terms. That's the golden equation of love: conceptualizing difficulties in relational terms. Otherwise, we're just stuck with a very thin narrative. Either I'm broken or you're broken, right? And this is where, the more, right? The more you do this, the more I do this. The more I do this, the more you do this. The patterns, the choreography. So that's essential to any approach to working with the relationship. Okay. 5 pillars of relational self-awareness. This part's really boring. It's about your relationship to relationships, cultural locations, looking at sexual self-awareness, which we will not be doing today, unfortunately, communication and conflict management, and developing that growth mindset, really seeing love as a classroom, and that we get to be, whole as we are and forever works in progress. I've been married now for 25 years and, did something last night. I was doing the dishes where I was like, did I really just say that to my husband? Do I maybe want to review my own slides? The difference is that we become savvier. I think we catch ourselves sooner, and we are a bit more humble around repair. And we have the ability to take ourselves a bit less seriously. But that's that growth mindset, right? How to, thank you for the hearts coming in on that one. That's the growth mindset. Knowing that, also, whatever you figure out in year 1 of your relationship, you're going to have to figure it out again, because I've not ever been in year 26 of a marriage. We also just emptied our nest. I've not ever done that before, external stressors, family stressors. So even if the couple has got their stuff pretty well worked out, they're both pretty steeped in relational self-awareness, you change that context, they're going to lose skills and have to, remember all their apology skills, and they're asking for redo skills because the context changes, right? Okay, so relational self-awareness is about helping our clients locate themselves and contextualize themselves, put themselves and the other person in a bigger context in order to validate their own experience, in order to validate their partner's experience. And the fact that forever in an intimate relationship, our perspective is going to shape our perception, right? That we're not ever going to become each other. We're not ever going to have exactly the same experience at the same time. So locating and contextualizing, to create empathic bridges so we can sort of visit each other's perspectives, to increase awareness of forces that are powerful but invisible, right? Noticing the way that gender subtly and profoundly shapes how each of us experiences this moment by having a couple be able to kind of put their gender glasses on and wonder about how their own relationship with masculinity and femininity might shape their experience, or socioeconomic status, how the ways in which their early experiences with money, with the community we're living in now, how that shapes. To depersonalize the relational dance, right? When I teach you vulnerability cycle mapping, we make a vulnerability cycle map with our couple or our individual where we're working systemically. We do that so we can be like, look at that. There's that cycle again. There's where you are on that map. So locating, contextualizing in order to resist the pull that is ever present of, did I screw up or did you screw up? Am I broken? Are you broken? Are we doomed? So we do that to depersonalize the dance. And okay, this is going to be the nerdiest part. Sorry. To help clients cultivate what Knudsen, Martin, and Kim call third order thinking. So it's not just about, here's my little sidebar on third order thinking. Third order thinking is not just about creating change, like I get less critical and you get less defensive. That's first order and second order change, right? Bringing down the defensiveness, bringing down the criticalness, bringing down, loosening defensiveness. That's all really essential. Third order thinking is expanding what's even possible for us as a couple as we look and think critically about the ways in which how we've been socialized sets us up to play certain roles. So third order thinking makes it possible to envision relational alternatives outside the constraints, beyond prescribed dominant social norms. Okay. So especially, you'll hear this the rest of today. It's about taking partners' early experiences, especially in family of origin, and taking partners' cultural context and looking at how that creates relationship dynamics. Okay. Just seeing how we're doing on our time. Okay, and we're not terrible. In conclusion, intergenerational patterns and cultural contexts prime our clients to amplify or spotlight some parts of their relational experiences and minimize, mute, or miss altogether other parts of their relational experiences. And the goal is to co-create with our client a nuanced understanding of the interpsychic and the interpersonal, what's happening within them, what's happening in the space between themselves and another person, in the service of increasing capacity for curiosity and expanding relational possibilities. That's a brand new slide. I'm just showcasing it with you all. So that's it. You may have to sit with that one for a little while, but we're not going to spend more time on that today. But I think that you've got, the sort of the essence of what relational self-awareness is all about. So what we're going to do now is talk about, okay, so what are our clients saying to us when they say, I feel like I'm losing myself in my intimate relationship, or I'm afraid of losing myself in my intimate relationship? And so I did what I often do when I'm sort of playing with and teasing apart one of these new ideas. I turned to my Instagram audience, which is now, lots and lots of people around the world. And I had them fill in this sentence. I feel like I'm losing myself in my intimate relationship when ... And so, we collected hundreds of responses that came in from lots of people, lots of places. I will say right off the bat, Northwestern University would never, this would never pass the institutional review board as empirically designed, or, could not be published in the peer-reviewed journal. So we're not saying that. My audience is highly skewed towards 30-something and 40-something women, predominantly US, then Canada, then UK. So we're not saying that this is a perfect sample by any means. My audience is like probably 85 to 90% women in any given moment. But your therapy practice, may skew towards female and those socialized in the feminine. So we took all these responses, and then I did this thing that researchers call a qualitative factor analysis, where you take data that is verbal data, here little sentence stems, and you kind of sort it. I love qualitative factor analysis because to me, it's like when you're growing up and you go trick-or-treating and you kind of bring all your candy home and you flip your bag on the floor and you kind of sort into piles. I love that kind of sorting and categorizing and what hangs together and what emerges from people's responses. So here's what people shared, and here's the way that I categorize the read of it. There were two big responses when people said, I feel like I'm losing myself. It was the internal experience, how I feel on the inside, and or it was what changes in my behavior. And so in terms of the internal experience, those clustered around these four ideas. I avoid conflict, or I silence myself. I question myself. I lose my opinions, or I can't identify my interests or my needs. I'd love to know how that fits with your kind of felt sense of what people are capturing, or your own experience of losing yourself in relationship. So this sounded like things like, I say it's okay even when I'm angry because his sadness at me being upset with him overwhelms me. I question myself. I ignore my gut feelings. I become more indecisive. I lose my opinion. I filter my opinion to match theirs. I can't identify my needs and interests, making their favorite foods not mine. I shrink myself to make them feel bigger. Yeah, lots of thumbs going up. Behavior change. I prioritize their needs. I accommodate or compromise. I exhibit relational vigilance. I let go of my own hobbies, routines, and self-care. And then sort of a miscellaneous that I'll give you a little sense of. But, prioritizing their needs, letting go of hobbies. Okay, the miscellaneous behaviors were, I start sounding like a martyr, which I think maybe also could be that relational vigilance idea. I try to be perfect, which I think also is that vigilance. I do something I'm not proud of, ideas like that. Okay, so that's what that kind of, that idea was about. And so as we move through today, I think the bottom line is, as our clients develop a more nuanced, juicy, thick understanding of their own past and present, they're harder to mess with, right? It's harder to kind of shrink. They know I think for so many of us, we didn't even know we were shrunk until we were all the way gone, right? So there's that noticing and learning. And I think when that process happens, I've got a number of cases right now, these couples at midlife that I work with, where very often it's like, oftentimes, especially when it's a heterosexual couple, as she's stepping into voice at midlife, the whole system is rattled, and we're moving from a system that perhaps looked much more traditional, much more perhaps patriarchal, to something that's much more egalitarian, right? And that's a transformation that happens within a system. I'm seeing thumbs going up because you're doing this work too, right? Let's put our heads together, because it's not easy. I think that very often, especially with a straight couple, he can feel shook, like, wait a minute, you're so mad so much of the time, or it didn't used to be like that. And I think for him, it can bring up feelings of, did I run right over you? Are you disappointed in me? And for her, it can feel like I remember Terry Real one time saying this, like, very often, especially when a woman goes from silence to voice, it can take a while to discern the difference between voice and relational voice, right? Standing up for myself without putting you down, right? And very often it's the couple that colludes to look the way they think they're supposed to look, right? These couples very often, would get an A++ on the perfect homemaker and caregiver, the perfect provider. They did their roles, they played their part. And what was lost along the way was intimacy and voice and collaboration and back and forth. So how do the three of us in therapy, celebrate what was done, everything that was able to be created under those terms, grieve what couldn't be done because those roles were limited, and now reimagine Who do you get to be in this chapter, right? Okay. Um, mm, mm, mm. And for our clients who are doing, who are sort of finding their voice between relationships, right? I think there can be a lot of vigilance that then in the next relationship they feel because they're so afraid of slipping back in. So it is making the change to learn how to identify what I want, how to use my voice lovingly but firmly, and knowing then that this really paradoxical thing happens, which I'm calling the paradox of the relational self. Okay, so this is tricky because two things are true at the very same time. You know my work, I love the dialectic, the both and, the paradox, that two things are true at the same time. Okay, intimacy is predicated upon separateness, right? There's got to be some space between us, as Esther Perel would say, like the synapse to cross, right? What does she say? Fire needs air. So there has to be separateness. There's not merger, even though I think especially in some of us, we really like eroticize enmeshment. We sort of have this idea that like sameness and merger and, reading each other's minds is what we want. No, intimacy is predicated upon separateness. There needs to be that space. Okay, so that's true. But what's also true is that love does change us. We are not, I believe the self is deeply and profoundly relational, right? I'm changed by my friendships. I just spent 3 days with my best friends from when I was 5 years, one from 5 and then 2 from 10 years old. And I spent 3 days noticing all the little quirks and things that I've picked up from them along the way. I'm not who I am, different, right? There's no such thing as like an essential Alexandra. I'm a little part of, Linny. I'm a big part of Allie. Like there's these like elements of those girls that live in me that shape my expressions, my quirks, I'm sure my hand gestures, right? All of this stuff that we're deeply relational creatures. So our friendships change us. Think about when you are with your family of origin or your siblings, like different parts of you come forward because the self is relational. So when we fall in love, in the process of creating a we, that me is in flux. So I want us to really normalize that, especially with our clients who oftentimes as a survival strategy or an adaptation have really, really, really gripped onto kind of hyper independence and are very, very, very attentive to any indicators of accommodation. If you're going to kind of confuse accommodation and loss of self, it's going to be really hard to get a relationship going because there has to be accommodation. We don't want it to be our client accommodates 90% and the other one accommodates 10%. But there has to be some ability to flux and flow and open and expand the self. So that's a really difficult tension that I want you to be validating with your clients. It's not clean cut. It can't be, in fact, measured, but I want us to normalize that, yes, you stay separate. And as you fall in love, as you build a relationship, you're becoming interdependent. And so that sense of self does shift and change. The key question is, to what degree is that change an expansion versus a contraction? So can we help our client keep touching back to, is the self smaller? Is the self expanded, right? Because what we want is, as they're building a relationship, to feel like they're an expanded version of themselves. They still have their voice and they get to witness themselves, letting go of the I in the name of the we, not across the board, but in a way that really is a source of pride and is a reflection of the deepening of trust rather than a loss of self. Last thing I'll say on this, Eli Finkel at Northwestern did like prospective or longitudinal research with a sample of young people. They might have even been college students. He studied their self-concept over time, prospectively. So self-concept meaning how well do you know yourself? And they had these scores. And so throughout the course of the study, a subset of that sample went through a relationship breakup. And what he found was around relationship breakup, self-concept scores tanked. People felt like, I don't know who I am. Maeve Hetherington, who's one of the first people to really write about divorce and family therapists, she said this, that when people are going through a divorce, there's a really central feeling of not me. I don't feel like myself. And Finkel's data back that up. A reduction in self-concept clarity. I don't feel so clear about who I am. So that transition, if the loss of a relationship leads to a kind of muddying of self-concept clarity, we can also imagine that the building of a relationship also leads to some muddying of self-concept clarity, right? The me expands as we become a we. Okay. So, in terms of I want to give you a couple of tools here for how we might talk with our clients about that sort of fear of losing ourselves. We know that I tried to play with a different word besides boundaries for this, because boundaries is a word that we're using so much these days that it feels like it's almost like losing its meaning. But I really wanted to capture like the idea that what we're talking about is really quite literally the boundary, not literally, is really the space between me and you. At the space between me and you, I have to be able to honor you without silencing me. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a boundary issue in that it is the marking of the space between me and you. And so what we want our clients to feel is both grounded, I know what I want, and connected. In knowing what I want and articulating what I want, I can also then factor in what you want, right? We can sort of do some negotiation or agreement making at the boundary. And so the emotion lives in me, but it says something important to or about us, right? So if I'm having that emotion of I'm silencing myself, that's happening inside of me, but it tells us both something important, and we don't quite know what it tells us. It may mean that in some ways you are having a hard time, the way that you respond to my share almost like punishes me for speaking up, right? You respond with an eye roll. You respond with defensiveness. You respond with criticism, which makes it difficult to put something into the space. It may also be that when I put something into the space, I come at you at a 10 out of 10 because I'm so afraid of you silencing me, right? So it is, I need to be able to speak an observation or a need or a question and have that met with gentleness and curiosity rather than eye roll and dismissal. Okay. So it is that I share the feedback in the service of intimacy, right? So me saying, gosh, I really feel like I am letting go of some essential self-care things that I used to do before we started dating. That's not me blaming you. I'm not saying you're doing that to me. I'm saying I noticed something about myself. I'm putting it in the space between us as something curious for us to look at. It's not a matter of blame. It's not a matter of shame. It's saying, I wonder what this means, right? That I feel like I'm losing some of the things that I really treasured before you and I started. I share the me to help the we. Okay. This is a tool that I got from Terry, who got it from Pia Melody and Janet Hurley, and you may already have this in your toolbox. But I think this can be really helpful for our clients who either describe biting their tongue or who, when they do share, they kind of come in hot because they're so either used to being squashed or afraid of being squashed. So this feedback wheel, I think, is just such a nice, benign tool. What I heard or what I saw or what I heard, right? So, when I shared that I wanted to go out with my friends for dinner, and you got really quiet. That's a description. What I made up about it, and that language is really important. So what I saw or heard was I said that I wanted to go out to dinner with friends, and I observed you get really quiet. What I made up about it was that you were disappointed and you thought I was being a really lousy partner and that I don't prioritize or prize you. How I felt about it, I felt some shame, but also some anger. What I'd like is, listen, it's not your job to validate me, but what I would really like is for you to reassure that we can have some time apart, and that you know that I still love you, and you know that I still value time together. So it's a way of, rather than being like, oh, great, here we go again. I can never do anything. Or no, it's okay. You seem uncomfortable. I'll take my wish off the table, or I'll rearrange my plans. It is kind of breaking it down in a way that the other person can hear and respond to, because I'm not making it a me problem or a you problem, and sort of describing what happened. And then we can look at, where was the breakdown? Okay, so these are just a few questions that you could offer to your client who's maybe struggling with feeling like they're losing themselves. What am I afraid will happen so these are self-reflection questions. What am I afraid will happen if I speak my truth? What does that fear remind me of? So this is what we're going to get to next, is kind of like, where do these fears come from? They're very often, there's a need for us with our clients to do some ghost busting, right? To look at, what is the family of origin experience? What is the prior relationship experience that's creating this? How much of this experience is I'm sensitive to something happening in the current relationship versus I'm bringing in a fear from a past relationship from family of origin? Who am I afraid of becoming in this relationship? When I have boundary feedback, i.e., I want or need to speak up, what do I hope my partner will remember about themselves, about me, about us, right? When it's time for me to say, hey, I was pretty uncomfortable when I, share with you my plans to go out with my friends. What do I want my partner to remember? And it may be that I want my partner to remember, this is pretty new for me. Speaking up, taking the risk to share feedback is pretty new for me. So go gentle, or, even if you want to get defensive, maybe give me a little cheer, because it's a big deal for me to say to my partner, hey, I'm uncomfortable here. Okay, then these are questions for your clients to, this is a list of questions that you could have your client ask their partner. I can imagine your client going home and having this conversation with their partner. Who are you afraid of becoming in this relationship? What dynamic does this remind you of from your past, right? So part of relational self-awareness is our client understanding themselves. Part of relational self-awareness is our client understanding their partner and having their partner be curious about themselves. So who are you afraid of becoming in this relationship? What does this dynamic remind you of from your past? What is it like for you to know that I'm sometimes afraid to share my data or my experiences with you? What can I do? This is your client talking. What can I do, beloved partner, to make my feedback easier for you to hear? That's a really brave question, right? I love that idea of your client going home to their partner and saying, hey, I'm aware that I want to speak up a bit more in this relationship. I'm really trying to break some patterns here. What can I do to make my feedback easier for you to hear? When it's time for me to kind of use my voice a bit more, what works well for you? Is there a context? Is there language? How can I set us up for success? And then triple bonus points for this one. Are there times when I feel hard for you to approach? This is our client saying this, right? Our client is asking their partner, hey, what's it like to approach me with feedback? What am I doing or not doing in those moments when I feel hard to approach, right? That's really important. I think, one of the questions I asked in the beginning was, for your clients who are single and dating, what are their difficulties? And one of the items was the people I'm dating are not emotionally available. This is like one of these tag words that we see everywhere, is like, stop dating emotionally unavailable people, or, all this kind of like this, in this beautiful era of social media and having so much psychoeducational content out there, our clients oftentimes kind of like grip onto one term, or frankly, content creators grip onto a term, and that term then ends up carrying so much weight. And so that idea of emotional unavailability is one of those big ones, isn't it? So when I don't know where I was going with that thought. Emotional unavailability. I think that I know what it was. If our client is so focused on somebody else being emotionally unavailable, what they might be missing is they might be making it really hard for their partner to open up because they're coming in hot with their dukes up because they feel like or fear that their entire sense of self rides on this one conversation. So they may be coming in with an urgency or an anxiety or an intensity that makes it really hard for their partner to open up. And so their partner might just kind of nod or shrug their shoulders, in part because there's so much intensity that they're not quite sure how to meet it or match it, or they don't have the time and space they need to kind of unfold their idea. So this courageous AF question of what can I do to make it easier for you to open up to me is really important to keep in the equation. Okay. Oh my gosh, I'm so curious how you all are doing. I'm going to keep talking. Somebody, I had a meeting this morning, they were like, you're going to teach for 3 hours? I was like, that is nothing. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. I'm an endurance athlete when it comes to teaching. So, okay, I keep going. You send me some thumbs up, and you've got questions in the chat for us to talk about in a while. So let's talk about how, if what we're saying is, developing relational self-awareness tools makes it harder to get lost. Relational self-awareness keeps our clients located and contextualized. They're more of a force to be reckoned with inside of themselves. Then what we have to do is help them understand and make sense of their earlier experiences, their love template. Okay. Love template is the kind of internalized map of relationships that lives inside of each and every one of us, lives inside of our clients. Our love template is made up of the observations we made when we were little and the experiences we had when we were little, especially in our family of origin. So if you have followed me for a minute, I talk about our family of origin as our original love classroom. When we are small, we are little social scientists, and we're like soaking in at a cellular level, all kinds of messages. Attachment style, for sure, right? The science of attachment is, crystal clear, robust, strong. We love it. We're taking in all kinds of messages about who we get to be, who we have to be, who we can't be, right? And making sense of the world of relationships around us. So it's the observations we make about how we notice people talking to each other based on gender, based on age, based on role, right? We're observing how emotions get shared or don't get shared, how repair gets made or not made, how people come back together after conflict, who is allowed to ask for what in what context. So we're observing and soaking and taking in. That's one kind of pathway. And then it's the experiences we had. It's who our family needed us to be, right? As our beloved Gabor Mate says, that when we're little, we risk trading authenticity for belonging, right? When we're little, our actual survival rests on belonging within our family system. So we're making observations, we're making observations, and we're being told directly, explicitly, or implicitly who we have to be to belong in the system. And so those experiences of becoming who our family needs us to be also shapes then, right? And I would say arguably, there's no relationship again that replicates family of origin dynamics like romantic partnership, right? That's why romantic partnerships shake up the snow globe. It's why I want us to be forever putting our clients in that family of origin context in order to have half of a clue of what's happening in their romantic relationships. I can't imagine doing couples work or doing romantic relationship work without really, really understanding family of origin dynamics and what happened in the past. To me, it would be like, flying without GPS or something. When we look at kind of patterns traveling from what people saw growing up to what they're doing in their life today, we talk about the path of repetition. So becoming, sort of repeating in their relationship, a role they saw played. in their home growing up. I'm becoming just like my mother. I'm silencing myself like my mother. I am biting people's heads off like my mother did. Sort of repeating what we saw. Path of opposition. I grew up with a really unpredictably angry father. And so I just really don't do anger. I do placate. And then what we're moving towards is a path of integration so that we've got the ability to understand what we witnessed and observed and experienced growing up. So we have that inside of us, we understand it, and we get to make different choices today. We're neither doomed to repeat or oppose. I think that's so often what happens is that, especially on that path of opposition, we sort of imagine that, if I grew up in a house where there's lots of yelling, I just won't do yelling, right? We imagine there's only two positionalities, and 180 degrees from anything is very rarely the answer, right? The opposite is very rarely the answer. And but it certainly makes sense. It certainly makes sense as an attempted solution to a problem, right? Growing up in an angry, loud, unpredictable home, it's really understandable to want to just create the opposite. There's a price to be paid for the opposite, right? It's still kind of too narrow a path. So, okay, we're going to spend just a little scooch of time on getting to know a system. But now that I know that in our system here, most of you are working with individuals, not couples, I'm going to kind of tailor this even more so to how do you get to know an individual in their context. And I'm going to still say to you that if your client is one partner in a couple, I still want you to get to know what let's call your partner, partner A. Obviously, I want you to understand partner A's history, but I also want you to understand partner B's history. I want you to really have a pretty solid understanding of your client's partner's family of origin. I want you to have a history of the relationship and then a history of the presenting concern. Now, if your client is a couple, you're doing this probably over the course of 3 or 4 sessions. I want you to I'm curious how many of you already do genograms. Maybe you'll tell me in the chat or the Q&A. Oh, a thumbs up. I love me a genogram. I just love, and listen, you can get really, like Monica McGoldrick was really the one who put genogram mapping, or put genograms on the map, put the map on the map. It is, so you can get really, really specific about the symbols that you use and the types of lines you do between different parts of the tree, but you can just keep it super simple as well. What I want you to do is really just like understand, okay, so who was in your house growing up? Tell me about your parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles. You don't need to get into the weeds of the cousins and the second cousins, but just at least get a sense of the couple of generations, grandparents, parents, client. It's a visual reminder for you, first and foremost, of your client's context. You are really putting your client in that relational context, and it's going to give you a much easier sense of how it's going to make it easier for you to understand the patterns that they're bringing into their romantic relationship if you can look at all the patterns that they witnessed and experienced. I also tend to show, I will at least just like hold up for my client what their genogram looks like, because I want them to also feel really contextualized. I want them to feel like the two of us or the three of us have put them in this larger context, because all those, what we couple and family therapists call the indirect system, right? Your client's mom is not your client, but the influence of mom is in the room with you. Mom's in the indirect system. So you're contextualizing your client for yourself, for your client. Easy way to organize all that data you get in the beginning. You can start to highlight patterns around, early loss or divorce and remarriage or patterns of addiction. It pulls, what I really like about it is it pulls for narrative. It pulls for storytelling. You are asking your client right off the bat to tell you the story of them. And you're asking for things like the timeline info, who was born when. You can ask for, I'll often just say, like, can you give me a few words to describe this brother of yours? How would you describe this sister of yours? Cultural location, certainly, especially immigration. When did immigrations happen? What's the story of the immigration? How chosen or not chosen was it? And socioeconomic status. this is a really important one because oftentimes with a couple, socioeconomic status is kind of blurred out or rendered invisible. So when I'm getting to know a couple and I've got both their genograms, I'm really explicit about the neighborhoods they each grew up in. Was there a time when the family system came into money as they were growing up or lost money as they were growing up? How do your family systems compare around socioeconomic status and community and, kind of like resources within the community? Because that's going to inform everything around, certainly around money and financial conversations, but also around beliefs and values and priorities. When and how do you support members of the indirect system, financially or with housing? So I really want you to get explicit and pull forward stuff around socioeconomic status. Otherwise, it's at risk of kind of hanging out in the background, affecting your understanding of dynamics without you really understanding why. I love this question. What were 3 aspects of your family of origin that you really cherish, that you want to bring with you into your life today, or that you do bring into your life today? What are 3 aspects of your family of origin that didn't serve you, that you'd like to transform? So getting explicit about what are the patterns that, that worked well for you and didn't. And in asking that, I think so often when clients come in, whether separately or together, they feel so problem saturated. Everything feels problem saturated. And so whenever we can find ways to help our clients remember that they are more than their problems, they are more than their difficult backgrounds, I think that's important. So asking explicitly about what was cherished, what worked well, what are the strengths in the family you grew up in is really, really important. If it's a couple and one is like, oh boy, well, it's going to take forever to get through his family is really messed up. Especially important, right? Like when there's an imbalance between the partners' families of origin, it's really important that the one from the troubled family has a chance to talk about what actually did work well. What were the strengths in that family? What did you need but not receive in your family of origin? What were your repeated or ongoing frustrations when you were young? So here you're just pulling for early experiences of who did you have to be? What was difficult? Oh gosh. We're actually not doing that well on time. Okay. How well did you feel understood and supported? What was school like for you? Losses, changes, moves. Relationships with siblings. This is a really important one. I think we are talking so much these days about intergenerational transmission of patterns, which I love and I'm here for. But when we focus so much about parents to kids, I think we're losing a little bit of sight about sibling relationships. So make sure you ask about those siblings then and now. Okay. So this is my next thing I want to cover with you all. Take a breath. We're doing fine. Okay. This is a relatively new tool that I'll show you on the next slide. You can go to my website and take the quiz. It's Family of Origin Roles Quiz. I've been doing a lot lately of like talking with people about the roles that they played in their families of origin, this idea of trading authenticity for belonging. So what I've mapped out here, I think there are 6 roles that we get kind of cast into in our families of origin. And I think that in relatively healthy families of origin, you get to play a lot of different roles. You get to show up one day as easy and one day as demanding and one day as chatty and one day as checked out. That's one of the hallmarks of a healthy family system or a healthy family system is that you can just kind of be different ways. You don't have to be this or this or this. And I think when a family system is struggling, either under systemic pressures like racism, poverty, et cetera, oppression, or struggling with addiction, abuse, there's a brittleness that happens when a system is stressed. It's like you have to be. We need you to be like this. We need you to be like this. Like there's a constriction of possibility when a family system is struggling. So depending on where your client's family of origin fell on that spectrum, they may really, really have had to play a role. And we play roles to create homeostasis. Systems need homeostasis. Systems need predictability. And so roles are a very easy way to make sure there's some semblance of predictability. What I'm going to do now is talk you through these 6 roles. This is the next survey question. So I want you to think about yourself for a moment, take off your therapist hat, put on your family hat and think about which role you played in your family of origin. And you may have a couple that pop up, and you may have, oh, when I was before 10, I was this. And then when my parents divorced, I became this. So just, it's a heuristic, it's a framework, and nothing is set in stone, but there is a quiz that you can take and see if it, you come up with the same response on the quiz as you come up with here. Okay. So I think oftentimes in families, there's a perfect one. And the function of the perfect one is it kind of having a perfect kid shows the world this family's okay. Things can't be that bad if we've got a superstar athlete. We must be okay if he's pulling straight A's. The gift and another element of my work is I talk about how our gifts and our wounds are next door neighbors, right? We are oftentimes two sides of the same coin. Those of us who grew up as perfect ones, we can perform under pressure, highly competent. That's a gift. There's a gift in having, grown up with your first experience of yourself being, I got to get this done for myself and for my family. You can be put, you can stay cool under pressure. The challenge or the wound or the growing edge is, I think, us perfect ones can be demanding and somewhat impatient. Some of us were the easy one in their family, and the easy one, like, it's all good. It's all good. Like, where did she go? Is she even here in the house? The easy one is there to reduce stress on the big people in the family, right? To just sort of give the parents one less thing to worry about. The gift there is easy ones often grow up to be highly flexible, adaptable, independent. Oh yeah, do the thumbs up when we get to yours. And then also put it in the quiz in just a moment, or the little survey question. The challenge can be difficulty being vulnerable, difficulty asking for help, difficulty like planting your flag and being like, actually, that's not going to work for me. The easy ones need to kind of grow into that or have some practice doing that. Some of us were the struggling one. The struggling one also in the world of family therapy would be called the identified patient, the one who's like, oh boy, here they go again. What happened now? What's the next thing? What this again? And the function there is to organize the family around a common goal. Everyone comes together because there's a crisis or a drama or something going on, or the struggling one just diverts attention away from the challenges of the big people. The gift there can be a lot of resilience, bringing people together. Difficulty is maybe struggling with some dependence on other people, difficulty standing up for yourself rather than feeling like you need somebody else to stand up for you. The peacemaker is the one who gets in the middle. Stop, everyone stop. And the function there is to create unity, diffuse tension, resolve conflict. Super helpful to have somebody who puts themselves on the line when things get tense. Yeah, lots. I think the peacemakers go on to become therapists or judges. The gift there is deep sense of justice, leadership, protection, like, not on my watch. The challenge could be suppressed anger, difficulty identifying your own emotions. Parentified child. So similar to the peacemaker, but here it's just a lot of empathy, like becoming the struggling parent's therapist. We oftentimes grow up to become therapists. I was a combo of parentified child and perfect one. The gift there is empathy and patience and gentleness. The challenge is difficulty with boundaries and the need to be needed, right? Upvoting that one hard. If your first experience of yourself is like, oh, you're so easy to talk to, you're such an old soul, then you develop the need to be needed. It's how, who are you if you're not being needed? The rebel is the one who says what nobody else will say or does what nobody else will do. The one who, oh, good, they're putting the quiz up. Courage, justice, leadership. And then the challenge can be hypervigilance, like a difficulty belonging. If you're the one who always had to be like, not okay, not okay, not okay, it can be difficult to just surrender to community, to belong to something bigger than you. If your first experience was you had to kind of observe and call shit out, how do you really get to like belong to stuff? Oh, interesting. Okay, so you're putting your votes in. Do that while I keep going. Can I not keep going? Okay, I can. There's the quiz. There's also a link on your handout. So you can just dralexandersolomon.com/roles quiz if you want to go take the quiz or have your clients take the quiz. It's free, obviously. Roles quiz. Okay. So if you are, I'm going to just do this part. I'm going to skip this part. Sorry, you guys. This is like the worst thing, isn't it? When somebody's presenting and they skip a few slides. I'll tell you what I'm skipping. If you were to do all of that we just talked through with a couple in the room, I want you to take time and ask the other partner about questions about let's say we just did partner A's genogram, learned about family of origin, the role they played. Before you start doing the same for B, take some time and ask B, okay, so what did what stands out to you about partner A's story, genogram, what's your relationship like with their family? Very, when you're getting to know, I guess, whether it's individual or couples therapy, assessment and intervention are entwined, right? It's not like, okay, we are just purely assessing. Okay, now assessment is done. Now we are doing intervention. Assessment informs intervention, and the intervention leads you to refine your assessment. So when you're getting to know this person or these people, it's assessment, but especially the way that I just talked about it, you're asking them to story their lives. That's an intervention, because storying your life, creating narrative coherence, revisiting the past, because now you got to show somebody, you got to show your therapist your past. All of that holds the potential to revise where the past lives, right? By receiving empathic witnessing from the therapist, at the very least, it softens the edges of that story. So you are creating coherence, you are validating prior experiences, you're helping them make sense, right? So that process, laborious as it is sometimes, that's an intervention. And especially when you've got a couple, for partner B to have that kind of front row seat of like, shit, I forgot what you went through when you were 8. Oh my gosh, you're right. Your grandma was really, whatever, really did lose her voice, or I forgot that painful story, like learning that. So take some time, especially in a couples context, to ask partner B about their experience of hearing partner A story their life in that way. It's oftentimes a powerful empathic bridge building experience, which you need right off the bat in couples therapy, because they're coming in feeling pretty heavy under the weight of their problems. So, okay. So that's all that is here. This is a little bit of stuff about how to get to know a couple. I'm sorry, you guys, we're not going to have time for this today, but you got the slides. So it's all kinds of questions I like you to ask about the story of the relationship. And that could be whether you've got one of them there or both of them there. You want to hear the story of the couple's relationship. Okay. All right. Vulnerability cycle mapping. Put your thumbs up if you already know how to do a vulnerability cycle map. Or do I get to be your first? Okay, some thumbs. Or you got to hear it again. Okay. I don't know what the little round face is. The little all right. So vulnerability cycle mapping comes from Mona Fishbane, who's one of my dear friends and mentors, and Michelle Shankman. It's an article that was published in 2004 that you have. It is my favorite way. Okay, I'm going to close this out. Can you all see the results? The most popular role that you all played was the parentified child, and then perfect one, and then easy one. A few rebels and a few struggling ones, and some peacemakers. Good. Okay. Thank you all. Oh, I didn't share the results. Hopefully they can. So a vulnerability, this is a tool that helps you as a therapist really understand the core impasse, the core challenge that this couple is dealing with. It also, like I said before, it helps you externalize the dance. So rather than partner A versus partner B, it's the couple versus the dance. It's the couple, a vulnerability cycle map puts your couple shoulder to shoulder, looking together at the problem, looking together at the dance. So that's a huge, it's a process whereby you help get the couple and yourself out of the blame game, gets you out of the referee role about whose fault this is, and helps you move into a more systemic understanding. The goal, as you'll see, is to speak from the vulnerability rather than the survival strategy, to evoke empathy from the other rather than a power struggle. So there's 3 elements that you need, and then we're going to map it. in a very high-tech way. Give you a preview. This is my high-tech vulnerability cycle mapping tool. So there's 3 elements that you need from each partner. And again, you can do a vulnerability cycle map with only one client in the room, with your individual client. You and your individual client can map the vulnerability cycle for their relationship, even if you never, ever meet the other person. Heck, I mapped a vulnerability cycle with my daughter, Courtney, when she was in 3rd grade, a cycle that was happening between Courtney and her 3rd grade teacher. So if we can do that together, you can do this with an individual therapy client without the partner in the room. You need 3 pieces of data for each person: core belief, vulnerability, survival strategy. So the core belief is like the schema, this person's relational organizing principle. Like if this client was a car, this would be like the bumper sticker on the back of the car, the kind of central belief, the motto, the theme, the schema that you develop, that your client developed in their current and past relationships. Examples are put other people first, or emotions equal weakness, or women are not to be trusted, or men only want one thing. That's kind of like a bumper sticker, like an organizing frame. It's a little bit more kind of like cognitive. The vulnerability is the unique sensitivity, the unique relational sensitivity. I hate to feel this way. I vigilantly scan, for fear that I'm going to feel this way. We develop our vulnerabilities from traumatic experiences, family of origin, social context, prior history, or injuries within the relationship. If you're working with a couple who's healing from infidelity or exploring the possibility of healing from infidelity, the vulnerability is around, something that is emergent from that stressor. Examples of vulnerabilities include: I'm not safe, I'm not prioritized or cherished, I'm broken, damaged, worthless, I'm being misunderstood, I'm being blamed. It's the way you are afraid to feel and the way you hate to feel. And there's an attendant emotion, right? I'm not safe here is like a fear and anxiety. I'm not valued or cherished, a sort of sadness, loneliness. I'm broken, damaged, a sort of feeling of shame. So that list of emotions, and I sort of mapped it on loosely because it's not like you have to have one of these. It's whatever you and the client kind of language or feel your way into around what is the way that you're afraid to feel, that you hate to feel, and that when you start to feel, you go from in polyvagal theory, you go from ventral to sympathetic or dorsal, right? You go from kind of calm, equanimity, a place of equanimity, to triggered, activated, stiff, rigid, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. So it's that kind of knot. And notice that the feelings that are attached to it, as I've mapped them, are more what Sue Johnson would call primary emotions, right? Not secondary emotions, but primary, like the tender underbelly emotions. That's what we're getting at here. What is the tender underbelly emotion that you tend to be afraid to feel in a relationship? Okay, and then it was core belief, vulnerability, survival strategy. These are the 3 pieces that you're going to get for each person in the cycle. And the survival strategy is like, what do you do? Where do you go, in conflict? The armor. How do you armor up, as Brene Brown would say? And these are, they're knee jerk, they're reactive, they're fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? That is what we've learned from the somatic crew, from the polyvagal crew. This is where we tend to go: fight, flight, freeze, fawn. I like also, this is a tool that I got from Jason Gaddis, who wrote Getting to Zero. This is sort of how he maps it out, right? Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Okay. So I'm going to, so this is the skeleton of a vulnerability cycle map. I'm going to take you off of, okay, taking this off of here. Okay. I'm going to tell you a little story and show you how we map this. So Oh, am I mirrored? Is this backwards for you guys? It might be.
No, you're good.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to share with you a vulnerability cycle from my own life. I will hope that perhaps someday you will return the favor by sharing a vulnerability cycle from your own life, just to share the vulnerability of the vulnerability cycle. So here's Alexandra, here's Todd, my husband. You start with a circle with a squiggle down the middle, right? Kind of away from the other, and the survival strategy is in the front. So what happened was Todd and I went for a walk. This is an old example now, but it's not broken, so I don't fix it. And I could maybe I'll use what happened last night. It's my new example that we were on a walk, and on our walk, we were just chatting away. And he said something along the lines of, we haven't done something, the two of us, for a while. This was when we were in our pre-empty nest. We haven't done something for a while, the two of us. My ears heard this as a combination of perfect one and parentified child. My ears heard this as a criticism, that he was judging me or blaming me or pointing a finger at me, saying that I was letting him down as a partner by not making time for the two of us. That was how I heard that. Doesn't matter that 9 out of 10 of you would have heard it as a bid for connection. In that moment, I heard it as an attack. So I responded to Todd saying, we haven't done something together, the two of us, for a while, by saying, we should plan something already. And he said, like, no, I'm just like saying it's been a while since we had a date. And I was like, right. I'm just saying, if you want it, you should get it, or, whatever. So that was, it was not on the spectrum of fights. It was a pretty low level fight, but it was, or conflict. But it was emblematic. It was emblematic of a cycle or a pattern that we're at risk of getting into. And so after I did my couple of daggers or digs at, you should plan something, I'm really busy, or you were really busy, he's like, forget it, it's fine. Don't worry about it. That was how the conversation ended. That was sort of the right. So if we were to map that, the vulnerability cycle, we would do this. So we have to do each of our core beliefs, vulnerabilities, and survival strategies. So my core belief, my bumper sticker, if I were a car, my bumper sticker would 1,000% say, it's all on me. Firstborn daughter in a family struggling mightily with addiction and a number of other things, I was like destined to have the core belief of it was all on me. I felt heavily responsible for, and not, well suited to ensure stability and happiness for the big people around me, right? It's all on me is my core belief. Vulnerability, with that core belief, my vulnerability is feeling blamed, right? Because if I'm responsible for way too much, anything and everything, that I'm sensitized to feeling like I'm being blamed for something, right? That's when I go from calm, being able to see things from all perspectives, to getting to feeling triggered and activated. The core feeling there for me is shame, right? That I have let people down. People who matter to me are disappointed. The survival strategy there, as you heard in that little conflict, was a little bit of fight and then flee, right? So I kind of dropped a few bombs. You should plan something, and then kind of like a shutting down. For Todd Solomon, he's the youngest of the boys. Anyways, you don't need to hear his whole backstory, but the go along to get along. Straight A student, didn't cause a fuss. So his core belief is don't rock the boat. Just let everybody else kind of take up space and just keep the peace, keep it steady. Don't rock the boat. Feeling not cherished, not prioritized, not valued, or sort of invisible. And so then it was easy for him when he felt like it was not, I didn't meet his concern by saying like, oh my gosh, thanks for noticing, I'm so glad, or I didn't know you were wanting that. Like, let's make it happen. Then his first thing was to placate me. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I meant. and, feel, and then just kind of shut down. So where you go from there. So once you get this sort of mapped out, and ideally with your couple, I could choose the example from last night or one from last month, and this would have been the structure, right? We got to the structure here by me telling you that story, and it is helpful, I think, to kind of use an example, but one example may not be able to capture the cycle. So you may kind of develop this over a sense of a few different times you've heard the pattern play out. So you can build this drawing from one example or from a distillation of a few examples, but it's basically, you end up with something that is pretty much the core dynamic. So what happens is, and then the way that you kind of show the engine of this is when it's a cycle, so it can start anywhere, but when I felt criticized or blamed, right, my vulnerability was activated. I moved into my survival strategy. I got kind of fighty and critical. Me moving into my survival strategy of saying, it's like, you should make it happen. What's wrong? What's the matter with you? Activates in Todd his vulnerability, which is rocking the boat, right? I basically just told him, rocking the boat. Why are you rocking the boat? He raised a need or a concern, and my response kind of activated with him that, that he's rocking the boat and that he's not being prioritized, right? By me kind of centering my own experience, my own defensiveness, his concern went tended to, and then he moves into his survival strategy, which is placate and shut down. And when he placates and shuts down, all that does is kind of confirm my vulnerability of I really have screwed this up, right? I really am being blamed. So that triggers even more shame, right? So that's the cyclical nature of it. And I think that in 20 plus years of using this, I really have never had it not work. They tend to fit together like lock and key, right? And so when you do this with this, and I think if this is a new tool for you, try it a couple of times on your own, but then you can pretty quickly start to map it in real time with your couple. And there's something pretty powerful about the three of you creating it together. So you may cheat cheat is in quotes. You may cheat the first few times by making it first and having a pretty good idea when you go into session about how you're going to, what you think these are, but then you can create them together in session and create the map together. And really it's a powerful way to help the couple start to hold on to the my stuff, the your stuff, and on the bathroom mirror, on the kitchen, in the kitchen, and kind of refer to it because it really holds the intrapsychic and the relational. And then of course, the way out of the cycle, or the way to keep the cycle from starting, is to speak from the vulnerability, right? I just want afraid that what you're saying is I've let you down, a partner to you these days, right? Speaking from the vulnerability. Okay, so that is mapping a vulnerability cycle. You've got in your packet, you've got a sort of some directions. So I'm going to have us go on break. We're going to do a 15-minute break and come back together. So what do we say, around 2:40, 2:38, 2:40? Okay, well, get yourself a snack and some water, and we'll see you back in a little bit, 15 minutes.
welcome back. Alexandra will be on in just a minute, and I think she's gonna jump on and do some questions. Hi, welcome back. I know we were texting, but now we can speak over Zoom. I will hop off. Everyone, thank you so much for being here. Alexandra, just so you know, we have well over 1,500 people tuned in live, and they're so engaged, and we're just getting all kinds of responses, both on the PESI side and here on Zoom that you can see. So thank you for this and this valuable information for everyone. We're so happy to have you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'll let you jump into the questions. Go for it.
Good. Okay. All right. I hope that hope you all got a good snack and a little stretch in your legs. Okay, so let's spend a little time doing some questions and then we'll move on. So I'm just going to kind of go right down the line. We'll see how far we can get. So Jerry Brown says, how is this general topic related to codependency? And I will say that I adore the work of Melody Beatty. I had her actually on the podcast a couple of months ago. And she was really one of the first. She coined that term and used it initially in terms of the partners, usually the wives of men, usually men struggling with alcohol addiction, and what she noticed around kind of how unhealthy their patterns were right alongside. I think prior to her really doing that work, addictions work was the person with the addiction. And so really that idea of codependency was the first concepts that took something from this highly individualized medical model that an addiction is a problem that lives inside of a person to a relational model that actually an addiction lives within a system. And there's, the air goes back and forth that when a person has an addiction, it affects the system, right? There's fallout on the system. And the way the system responds to the person with addiction actually has the power to shape the person's addiction. Like that was mind blowing. I think it's still like every time I talk about it, I feel like that, the emoji with their like mind being blown. I still feel like when I'm teaching that concept of when there's been research on you have a partner with depression and there's relational conflict, couple therapy is a more effective approach to alleviate the symptoms of the depression than individual therapy alone. Like mind blown, right? It speaks to, the sort of limitations of a highly individualized, medicalized model, the things that the sort of tools that we deal with in our work. So to me, that term dependency, I think I use it most as a bridge to talking about how individual behaviors and struggles have fallout everywhere and how people respond here, codependency being kind of silencing yourself or not being okay unless the other one is okay, actually can end up keeping a problem in place, right? That a loved one's codependency when someone's struggling with addiction can keep that addiction in place. It's an effort, certainly, to create homeostasis, to create some approximation of stability, because if somebody is wrapped up in addiction, they really do, there's a benefit, sort of a homeostatic benefit of having somebody else accommodate, kind of position themselves vis-a-vis the addiction. So that's really where I use that term. I know we have used it, it's kind of exported out of the addiction world now into all kinds of stuff. And so it is that idea of how can I be okay if you aren't okay? I think it certainly, I don't think it's been a word that I've used, all day so far, but I do talk a lot about, I think, the difference between interdependence, which is what I'm encouraging all of us to really keep in our minds, a model of interdependence. I would say interdependence is different from codependence. Interdependence is I can stand up for myself. I can keep my lip zipped while you stand up for yourself. And we sort of, converse at the boundary. We can sort of see how my needs align with your needs. And there's going to be, in any given, take one 24-hour snapshot of a couple's life together, there are probably hundreds of define, defer moments that happen between a couple. Are we having chicken or shrimp for dinner? Are we going for a walk first, then a nap, or a nap first, then a walk? Am I taking kids for a bath while you do the dishes? Or there's so many moments where one is saying what's happening, where I'm saying my need and my partner accommodates, and my partner says their need and I accommodate. That's interdependent. That's not codependent. But I think for people where if your original template of relationship was one where there was domination, where one person's voice or one person's mood or one person's addiction set the tone for the entire relationship, you didn't learn interdependence. You learned codependence. You didn't learn define, defer. The addiction defines and everyone else defers. And so for those clients, that was the first experience, was seeing lots of imbalance and lots of codependency. We can't be okay until unless mom's okay. Then it is a challenge, to feel what healthy interdependence feels like. And what healthy interdependence feels like is I can stand up for myself. I can make space for you to stand up for yourself. And I can trust that the sum total of our relationship isn't captured by how this one moment or interaction goes. So there's a whole movie we can watch, right? I think for those of us who have those early painful models, we can take a snapshot. We can feel like the whole relationship is snapshotted in this one moment of who's going to define and who's going to defer, versus wanting them to take a wider. So that may be the place that your role as a therapist is, when they come in with this one moment and they're like, look, it's codependency. It's, gaslighting. It's this, it's this. And they want to load everything up in that one moment. It is going to be your job as a therapist to really slow down, widen out, and look at the whole movie. That's where those questions that we haven't gotten to yet, maybe towards the end, we'll come back to them. When you ask your client or clients to tell you the story of the relationship, you are starting to get them used to sequences, patterns over days, weeks, months, years, rather than the sum total of our relationship is captured in this one moment. And you said that thing, and that's showing that you're gaslighting me. You know what I mean? Getting that kind of more longitudinal view of the relationships and the patterns. Matthew says, when you work with clients, does your modality include the goal of healing the specifics in front of you, or the goal individual growth that may be applied in the current system to other systems, depending on individual choices, or something else? Thank you, Dr. Solomon, for your help today. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think this is a context-dependent answer. When I'm working with a couple, for example, I really do see the relationship as my client. That does not mean that we are going to white knuckle, stay together, no holds barred, especially if they're coming in saying the question on the table is, are we staying together? Then we're in more of a discernment, what Bill Doherty would call discernment therapy, right? We're doing sort of pre-couples therapy. The work is figuring out what constraints have to be lifted in order to help the two of them deeply and fully commit to, X length of therapy, right? But let's say it's, most of the couples that I'm working with, they're coming in to, the bias is towards healing the relationship and making change. So I'm going to really view, Matthew, the couple, the relationship, as my client, and I'm working to transform dynamics, patterns, cycles within that relationship, so that they can have new experiences of themselves and each other. Now, I like to think, even a couple system isn't a closed system. So there may be times when, especially if it's kind of stress with an in-law or something like that, it may be that that we're talking about, we spend some time as a couple talking about how the two of them are going to deal with a difficult father-in-law, for example. And so some of our work then might be around creating change in, the partner's relationship with their dad to support the couple differently. But primarily, we're working on each partner understanding the role of the past, trying out some different moves in the present to change the dynamic in this relationship. if it's an individual case, I really am thinking about them. I really am thinking about growing their relational self-awareness in all of their relationships. It may be that we tend to center their intimate relationship, but I also am thinking about, okay, so how does the way my client shows up in their marriage, how does it parallel the dynamics with their sister, the dynamics with their father? So I probably with an individual case, I'm more so taking this lens or this pattern in the story and applying it kind of across a number of relational systems in the service of my individual client's growth. I mean, my dreamy situation is that partner A has my dreamy situation is partner A has an individual therapist, partner B has an individual therapist, and then there's a couples therapist. Like, that's my dreamy situation. And that is obviously a situation that can only be the case when there are resources available and therapists available. But I like that. I like that way of working. What's difficult then is there's got to be, and oftentimes I think is that the couples therapist ends up being kind of quarterbacking the team and ensuring that everyone's kind of rowing in the same direction. And there needs to be a sense of like sort of trust and respect across the three clinicians, that everyone's kind of working in the service of individual and relational health. Laura Bloom says, and I'm just going, it's nice that it's organized this way because, oh, shoot, I was thinking that the ones that were most upvoted were at the top. But like here, I'm going to skip down because I see one that has 12 upvotes. Rachel Shower says, how would you apply the golden equation to polyamorous relationships? Wonderful. That's a wonderful question. So I teach I'm going to respond in terms of the vulnerability cycle map, because I think, they're sort of similar tools, but the vulnerability cycle map is even, richer than just thinking golden equation of love. A few years ago, when I was training couples therapists, one of the grad students, I taught the vulnerability cycle map. And then one of the grad students came back next week and held up his piece of paper, and it was a triangle. I was like, yes. And he's like, I did vulnerability cycle mapping for a polycule, like these three, for polyamorous relationship. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I had to immediately take a photo of it and send it to Mona Fishbane so that she knew that her model was being used with polyamorous couples. And so I think that it's been done. And I think you absolutely can, you would just do 3 or 4, like whatever the dynamic is. And you're looking at, because, you're doing the same thing. You're holding on to what are the individual intrapsychic pieces and how do they play out in the space between. It is, I think there you're doing a little bit more sort of like you're almost using a family therapy or a group dynamics lens when you've got more, when you're in a more than 2 situation. I also would be wondering about bringing in the drama triangle, from, I'll think of their names off the top of my head. Drama triangle, where it's the persecutor and the victim and the hero, and the ways in which, and then there's sort of the transformation of it, where it's the coach and the challenger. And so I would also, especially when we're talking about a trio, that you can bring in those elements, because the dynamic is a bit more, you don't have a binary, you've got something a bit more expansive. But you can for sure be thinking in terms of what is the tender spot and what is the adaptation, and how does that play out in more of a systemic way? Absolutely. And I think that is, I think it's one of I have so much respect for the voices and the leaders in our field who are expanding, everything. I mean, it's built into the name of our field is couple and family therapy, right? So who are expanding the notion of couple to something more expansive and looking at the ways in which secure attachment, and thinking about Jessica Fern's work, polysecure and polywise, how everything we know about healthy relationships, it's not about 2 people necessarily, it's about creating healthy relationships, more broadly as well. So absolutely. Yeah. How do you approach this? Okay. So Ida Holm has got 8 upvotes on their question. How do you approach the loss of voice when it is more about emotional abuse or power and control? Absolutely. Ida, you are calling me in on this, because I ought to start the presentation by saying that a lot of what we talk about today does not rest on or does not hold true when we're talking about situations of abuse. It can't. This was one of the, the field of family therapy was built on systems thinking. And it was one of my mentors, Cheryl Rampage, and her crew out of Texas, who wrote the first book called Feminist Family Therapy, and was like, hold up, this system thing doesn't really work when you've got differentials of power, right? We see this with parents and kids. It is not, the power is not shared equally. There is forever additional burden and responsibility for regulation, for ownership, for accountability on a parent, over a child. And that's true when the parent is 50 and the kid is 20. I tell you what, one thing I know about parenting emerging adults, which is what I'm doing now, is you spend a lot of time reviewing. It's like being in a constant employee review, at least of my kids. There's a lot of revisiting of the past and looking at, Mom, why'd you do that? And why didn't you do that? And it is forever my responsibility to bear witness to, all of my F-ups and to say, tell me more about how that made you feel. And I did miss that. And if I could go back, here's what I would do differently. That's, it doesn't matter that my son is, outweighs me by almost 100 pounds and he's 3 inches taller than me. It does not matter. I'm forever mama. There's a way in which there's a power differential even now. And doesn't mean that I'm his victim, but it means that there's an additional responsibility on kind of how space gets held, right? So emotional abuse and power and control needs to be called what it is. I think this is getting into something that's outside the scope of today's workshop. But if you're working with a couple where that is, when there is interpersonal violence, it is largely contraindicated to work systemically with a couple unless the contract on the table is we are only here to address, interpersonal violence. That is the problem we are working on. And if it is low level, and if we can ensure safety, and if it's, expressive versus instrumental violence. But that is definitely like really tricky territory where we want and need lots of consultation and supervision and guidance, but it needs to be called, it is not, we can't call it loss of voice or self-abandonment in quite the same way when there is an actual risk of speaking up, right? An actual risk of punishment when speaking up. And when somebody is using power and control to create silence and compliance, we're not coming in on equal footing. And it's why the cultural context matters as well, right? It's why when there's a racial difference, an educational difference, that does not mean having a difference like that does not equal abuse, but it does equal, it does mean that there's unequal power in that way, unequal voice in that way. Even if the relationship feels very much samey, the way in which the world treats each of them or how the world perceives them or how their families respond to them isn't the same. And so I think that we as therapists, it's our responsibility to bring that context in and talk about how the racial difference play into this dynamic. And what does it mean to you, as a person of color to lose voice? What does it mean to you, as somebody with a disability to lose voice? Like just adding that in, sort of being, ensuring that we are unafraid to name difference in the room, to name power, which is not to say, it's not anything. I think that there's a way, especially when we're talking about how cultural differences shape couple dynamics, to name it is not to say it's anybody's fault, right? It's not anybody's fault. And, but it is an invitation to be collaborative and looking at, what do we think here, you guys? Like, how might this dynamic between the two of you be amplified given the racial difference between you? How might this, what do we think, given the fact that one of you is home full time and one of you is working full time, how does that factor in to this dynamic? So it's not, I think when we as therapists model that we're just adding another variable to the equation, we're approaching it with curiosity. I think we invite our clients to do the same, to be more curious than defensive about it, because very often it's either an agreement, right? Full-time being full-time at home or full-time in the workforce, hopefully was an agreement, or it is something that is just the way that it is when we're talking about a racial difference or an ability difference. So to kind of name those curiously and compassionately, and how does it factor in? Okay. What else? Okay, let's do Laura's. Oh, Laura has one with 15. What if the anxiously attached partner is over focusing on their healing and trauma work to resolve relationship problems, and the other partner is not acknowledging or doing their own work, ranging from defensiveness, deflecting, to narcissistic / gaslighting? Laura, I don't have a neat and tidy answer to this, but what I will tell you is some version of this question is the one that I have gotten asked more times. Like my first book, Loving Bravely, came out in 2017. And that was like, I could not believe how that was a question that got asked over and over again, is like, what if I'm really actively involved in my healing and my partner isn't? Like that, I now call it like a relational self-awareness discrepancy. I didn't know that was going to be the question that I got asked over and over and over again. So I'm glad that you're asking it, because it comes up a lot. So I've had to come up with some version of an answer to it. And I think that one thing that I often say is that I think there's a difference, frankly, a world of difference between somebody who is not invested in this work and somebody who holds this work in contempt. And I think that's what you're speaking to also, is like, okay, so disinterested, deflecting, all the way to gaslighting. Like, I think those are different. I think there's a spectrum. And once we're in the gaslighting and contempt, I think it's going to be difficult for it to be sustainable. So when it's more like over here, like, I just don't understand what you're talking about. I haven't done therapy. I probably am not going to do therapy. I think that's when, so let's say, okay, partner A is your client. They're deeply invested in their healing work. And partner B is not your client, because they're not anybody's client. And they're not contemptuous, but they're not super duper on board. Okay, so you're working with partner A. And I think what you're doing is you're telling partner A, listen, when you change your part of the dance, you do change the dance. So part of what we'll do here is work on you developing some new moves and some new capacities, and that will change the dynamic, right? Individual therapy with one person can have the power to change the dynamic. Now, you, as a therapist in this case, are tasked with resisting the urge to just kind of keep throwing partner B under the bus, which you may want to do because you might be kind of annoyed with partner B, like, just get yourself into therapy. Why won't you do the work? Like, you may have some of your own feelings about it, but if this is the situation you're working with, you are going to do what Benjamin Naj, one of the founding fathers of family therapy, called multilateral partiality. You're going to kind of keep, a vision of partner B that is sort of benign to neutral, and you're going to wonder, when partner A, your client, is telling you a story about how freaking annoying partner B was, as a therapist, you're going to have to wonder about partner B in a benign way, in a curious way, in an empathic. You're going to cross a little empathic bridge into partner B's mind and wonder what might be going on for them, even though you don't know them and may not know them and may annoy them. Because, as long as we're not talking about like partner B as being abusive, okay? Because partner A is telling you a story, It is not capital T truth. It is not capital R reality. No matter how amazing a therapist you are, and no matter how much you're helping partner A develop relational self-awareness, partner A is coming in, telling you a story from their experience, from their perception, from their positionality in the relationship. So one thing, you can make sure that partner A is backed up enough in the story to give you the context that you can start to put clues together, rather than partner A starting the story the moment that partner B lost their cool, right? If that's the story, you wouldn't believe what partner B did to me this week. Partner B stood up while I was talking and walked away. You got to be kidding me. Gaslighting 101 or whatever. I'm not saying you're going to do that. But make sure that you get part A to back up enough to give the entire story so that you can say, you know what? I wonder, remember how we talked about when you guys get into this pursue or distancer thing, where the more you're talking, the more they're shutting up. Remember how we talked about how maybe you pause then when you notice partner B shutting down, going quiet, that you maybe stop, like that you just take a breath and you say, actually, I'm going to step away. I'm going to go do some journaling. I'm going to take a shower, that you kind of model for yourself and for partner B that you're not going to get into this again. So I wonder, was there a moment when you thought of stepping away before it got to the point of your partner getting up and walking away? It's not judgment, it's curiosity. You're just doing some detective work. You're making sure you've got a long enough view of the story because you're looking for the only leverage you have, which is partner A, right? I also like an intervention that comes from Eagle's research, which he did this by accident. He didn't even know he was doing such a cool thing. But the story of this was that he had couples in a test group and a control group. The couples in the test group, they would like X number of times a year do a journaling exercise where they would write for 15 minutes about a conflict they'd recently had. And when they would write that conflict, they would write about it from the perspective of a neutral third party who loves them both very much, who holds them both in warm regard. And they would literally write, Alexandra said, and Todd said, and what Alexandra was feeling was this, and what Todd was feeling was this, and what Alexandra wishes Todd understood is this, and what Todd wishes Alexandra understood is this. He basically had couples in this test group write a systemic story, like create a vulnerability cycle basically in their journals. And what he found is that that group, it's kind of sad, they had less of a decline in relationship satisfaction over time than the group who didn't do that. They're sort of like these were like newly married couples. There's a predictable little slippage in relationship satisfaction post-wedding, but the ones who were writing about conflict from the neutral third perspective, they had less slippage in relationship satisfaction than the other group did. So, long way of saying that you could have your client, partner A, do that practice, right? Write about the conflict from the perspective of the neutral third party, and you could do that in your work with them. Okay. I think that the bottom line here, very long-winded answer. The bottom line here is I think it's a risk when you've got one partner who's deeply invested in traumatic healing work, in expansion work, in relational self-awareness work, and the other person is just like shrugging their shoulders and crossing their arms. I think it's a risk. I think that couple is, there's some amount of risk there. There's a ceiling on intimacy, right? Kind of ceiling on what's possible for them, and maybe a kind of mutual sense that we're drifting apart. If for no other reason, then partner A is developing a kind of language that partner B doesn't really understand. And so I think it's part of my pull to this book was what's the smallest possible dosage that somebody, a love nerd give to a partner that just doesn't really value this? What's the smallest possible dose? Is it a podcast? Is it an Instagram post? Is it a love every day post? So maybe your client, works on love every day, but they only once a week pull one entry and have partner B just have a 7-minute conversation about that one, right? So it's like microdosing. Can partner A microdose? And can partner A then look at the fact that actually we have way more interesting conversations now that I've been for 6 months than we did 6 months ago. So if I grade my partner on a curve, they're making progress and we're making progress. Do I wish they had a therapist of their own? Sure. But I see that they're opening. I see that they're softening. I see that there's little shifts that are happening, and that keeps me inspired and engaged. I also, partner A, I want them to have like friends they can turn to and talk about this stuff with, or a sibling, or a support group. Like, I think we don't need to have all of our, this is something that we talk about a lot, right? It's like, we don't need all of our stuff by the same partner. And there can be sometimes two people who are deeply immersed in relational self-awareness can get stuck. I have that problem. I've had couples where I have said, you are setting a timer for 15 minutes of relational talk a day. No more, because if they're left to their own devices, they're just unpacking and turning the kaleidoscope and analyzing everything. They're spending so much time analyzing that they forget to do the relationship. So I think there's an error or a risk that way. And so I would want partner A in this situation to remember that their partner doesn't have to be like them in order to in order to have a connection with them. And there might actually be partner A may have a thing or two to learn from partner B's, have a kerfuffle and move on. Do not map everything according to a vulnerability cycle. To not add 6 layers of meaning before you move on to the next conversation. So that's another reminder too for partner A is like, thought experiment. What are the benefits to somebody who doesn't live in this world the way that you do? Are there any benefits? What are the perks? What do you get from it? What might have led you to somebody who doesn't hold this work in the same esteem that you hold this work, right? So it may be that the couple grows apart and what worked no longer works because partner A wants to live in a deeper, more informed way. It may be that this relationship isn't sustainable, but similarity or sameness is not necessarily a requirement for intimacy. In fact, it's a requirement for intimacy. So is this a difference that can be just sort of something that's tolerable, or not? So there's lots about that. Okay. Oh, darn. All right. Well, I think we're going to move on, but keep upvoting the questions. And we'll come back because we've got, time. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen again. I'm going to get back to our business here. I think we're good. So I said at the beginning that we're now going to spend the rest of our time together. Oh, thank you. Talking about 2 sort of relationship imbalances where your client might be saying to you, I'm losing my voice, or am I losing my voice, or I'm afraid of losing my voice. And that's pace discrepancies and relational resentment. So let's kind of tackle those now with the frameworks and language that we've been working on developing together. Okay, so pace discrepancies. So you have in your worksheet packet a worksheet that I developed on commitment sequences. So I think that we have, all of us have internalized ideas about how quickly our relationship should progress. Everything from first swipe to first coffee date, how quickly that should happen. How quickly it should go from coffee date to DTR, what the kids call DTR, define the relationship. From DTR to, whatever, meeting family. We have a built-in sense of how much time those sequences should take. And we have a built-in sense of what the order of events ought to be. What is the sequence? What should happen first, second, third? And that's informed by culture, by experience, by gender, by social media, by family pressures and family questions like, are you having a baby yet? Are you getting married yet? You're moving in together before an engagement ring, all of this kind of stuff. So there's a number of factors that shape both what we expect the narrative arc of commitment to look like and how quickly or slowly that arc ought to move. And so the chances that two people come together with the exact same trajectory and timeline are 0.002, right? It's just not going to happen. There's going to be one who is a bit, they may have a difference about what ought to happen next, and they sure as shit are going to have a difference about when the next thing should happen. And the one who has their foot on the accelerator oftentimes feels as uncomfortable as the one who has their foot on the brake, what I'm going to call the FPP and the SPP, the faster paced partner and the slower paced partner. Neither of those positions is particularly comfortable. Each of those positions has its attendant set of uncomfortable, gnarly knots and feelings that are oftentimes amplified by family of origin wounds and experiences and tender spots. So that's what I want us to spend a little bit of time looking at. But the first thing I want to highlight to you is by talking about this as I started calling it a pace discrepancy, because what I love is what we're doing, and I would love for you all to start, using this term, not because it's mine, maybe a little because it's mine, but because what it does is it puts a systemic frame around it, rather than doing things like commitment phobic or anxiously attached or needy and avoidant. There's a way that we can get into these highly individualized conceptualizations. Like the accelerator one is the needy one. They're the anxiously attached one. They're the clingy one. They're the da-da. The one with their foot on the brake, the slower paced partner, is avoidant. They are commitment phobic. They're unavailable, da-da-da. Those are individual frames around it. Is there a kernel of truth in it? Potentially, right? Because my stuff plus your stuff equals our stuff. But the moment we call it a pace discrepancy, we're inviting a really, really different conversation, because we're not trying to diagnose to this versus to that, TOO. You're to this and you're to that. Because when it comes to humans, we're also freaking humany. That's like a tightrope. Okay, wait, by whose standard? What is the exact amount of accelerator that's okay? What's the exact amount of brake that's okay, right? It's too much of a tightrope. It's too binary. It really, quite frankly, stops being very interesting. So when we call it a pace discrepancy, we've now wrapped this problem in a relational lens. And the two of them, or the three of us, can start to look together at why, right? What's keeping, and a constraint, this idea of a constraint question. So rather than asking, why are you in such a hurry to get married? We would ask a constraint question, which is, what's keeping you from being able to kind of imagine a wedding date down the road? Rather than asking, why won't you just move in with your partner? We would ask, what's keeping you from feeling ready to move in with your partner? Do you hear the difference? Why won't you move in with your partner invites defensiveness. It invites explanation. It invites rationalization. It invites criticism of the partner. The moment I ask you why you won't move in with your partner, what you're going to tell me is something's wrong with my partner for wanting to move in together so soon, that they don't understand this, or they're missing this, whatever. So the constraint question is, what's keeping you from being ready? What's keeping you from slowing down or relaxing or letting go or being in the present moment, right? And those are the kinds of questions that get opened up when we start calling this a pace discrepancy. But you may send me an email later and tell me that I'm you don't like it, or you've got a reaction to it, which I'd be curious to hear as well. Okay. I can't make this. When I put the slide here, I was like, don't put that slide there. You're going to not be able to make a gentle segue into or out of it. But then I said to myself, we'll work it out. But I don't have a gentle segue. And I just want to tell you that I like this idea that when we're talking about commitment, there's two phases of commitment. Commitment is about, I'm committing myself to this relationship because I want to. I'm signing up for this class with you because I like the curriculum. I like what you have to offer. I like what this relationship has to offer. I'm here because I want to be. I choose to be here. That's commitment, right? I am investing in the relationship. I am showing up. I showed up yesterday. I'm showing up today. I'll show up tomorrow. That's that choicey part of commitment. There's another face of commitment, which is I'm here because it's hard to leave, right? There's a way that commitment is a guardrail against impulsively, mic drop, peace out, which is, I think we can do because intimate relationships are so freaking activating, because it's really hard to coordinate a life with somebody else, because choosing to be here highlights everywhere else I'm not going to be. By being here, I'm not there, I'm not there, and I'm not there. So I like this kind of dialectic or paradox, it's not a paradox, it's a tension. This tension of commitment is both the choice and the guardrail or the obligation. Because I think we act, especially in romantic relationships, we act like if it's not 100% choice and pride and wide open space to just show up again and again, then it is prison, it's constriction, it's, duty without desire. And so I want our clients to be building. The other way is a problem too, right? Being 100% here purely because it's hard to leave, purely because the history, purely because where the hell else would I go? That's not a setup for a thriving relationship. That's not what we're trying to build. But I don't want us to act like that's not part of it. Because sometimes I think what people, especially around a thing like moving in together, well, I shouldn't say that, around any of these commitment milestones, when you are thinking about the next milestone, it does put you face to face with we're deepening, we're further wrapping our lives around each other. It's going to make it harder to leave. Yes. So to put your head in the sand and act like that's not part of it doesn't do anybody any favors. That is part of it. That is right. That is part of what you're doing, is deepening. That will make it harder to leave. And that's why it's so important that you continue to connect within yourself and with your partner about how you're choosing this. This is that you're deepening precisely because you like it so much. You are growing together. You're invested. You're curious. Okay. All right. Moving along. So pace discrepancy through the lens of relational self-awareness means that we're going to think about how not just the sequencing of what happens first, second, third around commitment, but how long and when these things should take are multiply determined. There's no capital T truth, as much as perhaps somebody on Instagram wants to sell you a program that shows you whatever. There's no capital T truth here. We have a social clock. So Bernice Newgarten, back in the 70s, talked about how we have a social clock that's pretty much, she argued that it's as powerful as our biological clock. And the social clock is looking to the left and the right and seeing, who is in a relationship and who's not. I watch my kids do this, even my kids who are both in college, but also my college students at Northwestern. They're looking at their friend group. What percentage of the friend group is in a relationship? What percentage of the friend group is single? As the balance tilts towards more couples, suddenly the person you're hooking up with, is starting to look more like a boyfriend or a girlfriend. So you're, even in that context, we sort of partner up or feel more ready for something when everybody else is. And certainly there's like that big rush of weddings that many people experience. In that moment, your partner is starting to look more like a spouse. So we have the social clock where we're and with the social clock is a fear of being both the first and the last, right? That there are feelings, or at least feelings about being early and late. So listen for that with your client. Listen with your little third ear for the ways in which your client is looking to their left and right at what the rest of their peers are doing and anchoring themselves off of that. Gender role socialization is huge here, right? I think there's a deep fear, especially for heterosexual couples, cisgender hetero couples. I think women have I think the common narrative is that she's worried about hanging around for a situation where he's not going to commit. And I think there's a differential pressure on men versus women around this stuff. And that has to do with fertility windows and giving boyfriend benefits to a hookup buddy, or I'm butchering it, but the idea that women are at risk of giving more and not getting enough commitment in return. I mean, back in the day, the whole moving in thing together was like, he's not going to buy the cow if he gets the milk for free. Like, I can't even say it out loud. It's so gross. But like, literally, my friend had this said to her by her mama or grandma when she got married in like 98, which was, to the young people here a million years ago, to the Gen X people, it was not that long ago, right? Like, that was a thing that people said. Don't give him the cow. He's not going to buy the cow if you give him the milk for free. This idea he's not going to marry you if he's living with you. Gross. But we didn't create that message. That message is in the ethos. It's in the air. That's the backdrop of patriarchy against which all relationships are built, and that very readily and easily plays out for cis hetero couples. Pace discrepancy is messages from indirect system. I already said that, the ways in which people in the family are like, can you believe they've been together for so long with no baby? What do you think's going on? All the ways in which the indirect system kind of sets expectations for when things should happen. And then an individual difference that Zimbardo pointed out, not in terms of pace discrepancy, but just the psychologist Zimbardo said that you can kind of put all of us in two buckets: present oriented versus future oriented, that we have kind of a clock, an internal, or not a clock, it's an orientation. How much are you in the present moment versus the future moment? So you see how this can play out. You've got a couple where one is a present moment person and one is a future moment person. Shit's going to hit the fan real quick, right? The future moment person is like, when are we moving in together? And the present moment person is like, can we just please enjoy today? And then all of that, gender plus social clock plus family system plus orientation to time, is intersects with intra-psychic activation around transition. What comes up for you around the idea of deepening commitment with this person? What are the fears? What are the longings? What are the hopes? What are the stories that get stirred up inside of you? So social clock questions for self-reflection and or curious conversation. So these are some questions that you could have your client talk about with their partner, or have the couple talk about. What kinds of timelines do you have in your head? Did you have an idea, married by this age, kids by this age, or what are the timelines that you kind of have built in? Which of your cultural identities most powerfully informs your timelines? Why? How? How's your family of origin shaped your timeline? In what ways have your friends shaped your timeline? And then media. So again, just like putting timeline and social clock on the table for conversation, so that it's not just commitment phobic because of wounds, No, add some layers to it, like add some complexities. It's a pretty benign way to start, because we're not saying rights and wrongs, but we are saying that there's some norms that we all come in with, and making that, like, kind of surfacing the implicit, making it explicit is really helpful. I want you also, when you have a pace discrepancy that you're dealing with, to get a sense of, to what extent is this a goals, values, vision difference versus a timing and pacing difference? Do you see what I mean? Like, I want to get married within 2 years versus I want to get married within 3 years is very different than I want to get married within 2 years versus I don't know if I want to get married, right? The former is harder to navigate than the latter. It's easier to kind of work with a discrepancy in a timeline versus a discrepancy in a vision. So that's what you're trying to surface. But I think because there can be so much internal activation, couples can miss each other in this conversation. They don't know what the problem is. Is the problem a timing problem, or the problem is a values problem? And then when a couple gets polarized, right? Like the accelerator one is saying, when are we getting married? When are we getting married? As they get polarized, the more the faster paced partner is saying, but what about marriage? But what about marriage? But what about marriage? The more the slower paced partner may move from, I don't know when, I'm not ready yet, to, I don't even know if I want to get married, simply because of the polarization process, rather than because of some actual inherent deep questioning of marriage. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I don't even know if I want this anymore, or I don't even know if I want this, maybe a reflection of the way that this couple has gotten polarized, the cycle has taken off, the urgency, the kind of like you're too needy, you're phobic, has gotten to such a place that now the phobic one is saying, I don't know if I want to get married, when that may not actually be their truth, but it's a reflection of a set of conversations that have gone awry. Is this pulling imaginary taffy? Is that helping you? Okay. To what degree is there a misunderstanding of what's being asked? What does the faster paced partner want? I think sometimes, and I think this is, I'm going to make a sweeping gendered generalization here. When you have a cis hetero couple and she's the faster paced partner and he's the slower paced partner, I think oftentimes he's got it. And even when it's about like just defining what they are to each other, she may be saying, can we define what we are to each other? And what his ears hear is that she's making up. She wants promises. She wants forever. She wants a pathway to marriage. And all she's like is, no, seriously, I literally want to know if I'm still allowed to make out with other people. Like, it's not that much. There can be a miscommunication around what's being asked for. And so just getting really clear, like, what are you wanting? Are you wanting clarity? Are you wanting imaginative conversation? Because sometimes it's like, I want to talk about marriage just because to me, in my brain, I think it's really fun to play with possibilities. That's one of the ways I do it with my girlfriends. My sister and I used to do it. We just talk about the future together. That's just playful. That's just like literally imagination. I'm not pressuring. Oh, okay. I can do imaginative conversation. Is it planning? Like, is the faster paced partner bringing up, I'm going to stick with the marriage example, because they actually want to start planning towards that. If the wedding is going to be 3 years from now, kind of backing up to, whatever, is the execution on a plan? Like, I want the clocks. So what is it? So just getting clear on what's being asked here, because I think, again, that polarizing can happen, especially when there's a lack of clarity. I think the stage is even more set for polarization and misunderstanding. And then this is a really big one. To what degree can each partner empathize with the difficulties of both positionalities? That's hard, right? And I think that's often one of the side effects of getting polarized is you lose empathy for the other person's experience. It's not easy. I think the slower paced, there's different activation. The faster paced partner, it's not easy to be the one who's more ready, right? Who's eager, who's antsy. It may touch a wound in them about not feeling chosen. It may touch a wound in them, a fear of being abandoned. It may touch a wound in them around worthiness. It may touch a wound in them about being afraid of being made a fool. It may touch in them a fear that I love you more than you love me. One of the hardest things about relationship is because you can't do a blood test and measure the amount that I love you versus the amount that you love me. We can only just ascertain it from these cues. Look, all the hearts going up. Yes, that one is so real, isn't it? The faster paced partner can conflate your slowness with your lack of love for me. I must love you more than you love me. And for the slower paced partner, they're like, no, Jesus Christ, it's not about, Jesus Christ. No, it's not about love. It's about, I am nowhere near where I want to be with my career. No, it's about, I have not worked through my fear of divorce because of my family of origin, whatever. The ways in which it feels deeply personal, and of course is personal, and also is more a reflection of what's happening inside the slower paced partner. So inside our slower paced partner is a ton of vulnerability. It is not easy to feel like the slower paced partner loves the faster paced partner and is not in this moment giving them what they want. It's a terrible feeling. How terrible to feel like you can't give somebody you love the thing that they want. That feels rotten, right? And it may tap into all kinds of, if they had a parent who was cruel or actively, intentionally withholding, would dangle things, right? In like a really cruel, manipulative way, the slower paced partner may feel like, oh my God, that's what I've become. No, you are not ready, right? Not being ready is not the same thing as being cruel. Those are not the same thing, but that can certainly get stirred up. The slower paced partner may feel like their own not enoughness is activated because I'm not I'm not giving my partner what they want. They're frustrated with me. They're disappointed in me. They may also, the slower paced partner might feel, smothered and controlled, especially if the faster paced partner is now saying, well, if it's not by this point, I'm out of here. Ultimatums are starting to kind of circle around. It may kind of increase a sense of being controlled. And if that slower paced partner has a history in their family of origin of being controlled, having their voice taken from them, they might start to double down just purely so they can feel their own agency, right? Okay. Oh, I love this topic so much. I'm sure I'm way behind on time now. Oh, not too bad. Okay. Here's what we want our faster paced partner to be thinking about. Wait, what are you wanting or needing from a conversation about the future? What is it you're wanting to feel, to hear, to know via conversation with your partner? How else so if what the faster paced person really craves is that imaginative stuff about looking ahead, how else might you and your partner play with your imaginations together? Like, are there if this is kind of an avenue for intimacy, how else might you do that? How else can the slower paced partner convey to you that they're committed, that they're not going to up and run tomorrow, or that they love you, right? How else might they be able to convey their love, their adoration of you, at least for now? What do you want your slower paced partner to be able to remember about you as the two of you struggle with this together? Right? What do you want? How do you want the slower paced partner to view you, to hold on to? What do you want them to hold on to about you in the midst of the struggle? And that might be something like that I'm not needy, weak, controlling, that I am excited and invested and have this vision because of how much I like them, right? It's like, what is how does the faster paced partner want to be held in these conversations? I think that's a really important one because I think it can become the case that both of them start to believe that the faster paced partner is needy, is controlling, is weak. They can both start believing that. So let's have, maybe somebody can remember that the faster paced partner is more than their urgency. Okay, for our slower paced partner, I really want us to be talking with our slower paced partner about their own individual goals, because I feel like 9 times out of 10, when I've been in one of these, and you all tell me, I think a lot of it has to do with, I'm not where I want to be individually. And that makes me, if I'm not right with the me, I don't know how to get right with the we. And I've seen this with people of both genders, and surfacing that was really helpful. I'm thinking about a case where it was a cis, hetero, pretty traditionally gender role based couple. And she was a slower paced partner and he was a faster paced partner. And for her, it was like, I love you. I'm super clear. I see the whole thing. I want to, but I got to have a little more me time. Like I had this vision of living with my sister in, this city, and I had a vision of this. So then by surfacing that, we were able to, kind of create those possibilities so that she could kind of check a few more things off of her list. Again, not with the promise that was going to get her ready, but at least we were then on a treatment plan, of helping her get ready. So what is it? What is it with your own? Is a slower paced partner have some goals that if we can surface them, we can either work on a plan to have them move towards those goals, or we can sort of dissolve it, because maybe the slower paced partner is like, I need to have my college loans paid off. And the faster paced partner might be like, are you kidding me? We're going to be 80 or whatever it is. I'm okay with it, or let's kind of do a workaround or put it under a different light, or understand where that belief comes from, so just getting the me stuff on the table that might be part of the constraint. And then then that's a 2-part question. What's the connection between your personal goals and your relational hesitation? Is there one? How do you want to feel if and when you and your faster paced partner move to the next phase? This was a really helpful question with this couple I was just mentioning. Asking the slower paced partner, like what will you be feeling inside of your body when you're ready for the next step? Like getting, again, that sort of vision so that the slower paced partner has a sense of of what needs to loosen or shift. What do they need to feel in order to kind of feel more ready? And then same question as the last slide. What do you want your faster paced partner to be able to remember about you as the two of you guys struggle with this? And that might be things like that I'm not an avoidant, narcissistic, shut down, commitment phobic, whatever, that I'm struggling, that I'm invested, that I am not disappearing tomorrow, that I'm also excited about being with them, whatever it is. Okay. Good on that. Okay. Look at us moving along. Yeah, we're in the home stretch. Got my afternoon fresca going here. So we'll do about 20 more minutes and then we'll do 15 more minutes of questions and then we leave you to the rest of your day. Okay. So this is another kind of relational imbalance, which is working with resentment. How do you work with resentment? And the word resentment came up a lot when I did that Instagram survey and I asked, like, I feel like I'm losing myself when resentment was kind of frequently cited, that can be that those things are tied together. And it makes sense because what is resentment? So psychologists have defined resentment as a complex emotion, so not a primary emotion, but a blend on the emotion wheel, that it's a blend of disappointment plus anger plus disgust. That it's a downstream effect of the more primary experiences like neglect, disappointment, envy, disgust, exasperation, irritation, kind of like ends up converging on resentment. It comes from the French word ressentir, which is like plus emotion. So feeling something again and again. And that's certainly like that lands with me, that resentment has this kind of ruminative quality, doesn't it? It's like a kind of buffering, like the little circles going around and around, playing an incident over and over again in our minds, or running the numbers, that kind of like the way that resentment manifests as scorekeeping. That's kind of a stuck ruminative. I did this, they didn't do this. I texted twice, they didn't text at all. They didn't, I've met their friends, they've met my friend, or they've met my friends, I haven't met their friends, like the kind of quality of like playing it over and over again, which I think also like rumination can also fuel that sense of like, I don't feel like myself, because I'm ruminating. Which made me think when I said not myself, somebody had asked the question, who was the person I cited that talked about divorce as a not me feeling? Maeve Hetherington. And I read that in a book by Jay LeBeau called Treating the Difficult Divorce, which is an academic book, like a kind of Guilford Press, like a book for academics and therapists, but it's a very, very, very good book. Treating the Difficult Divorce, Jay LeBeau, Maeve Hetherington. Okay. Nelson Mandela was quoted as saying that resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. So again, that same feeling of like suffering and stuckness and a need to be liberated from it, right? Liberating yourself and other people from it. Sometimes resentment is referred to as the emotion of justice because it develops in the face of something that we perceive as unfair. We develop resentment when things are unjust. So resentment is like the little blinking indicator light that says, something is not fair here. Something is not just. There's an inequity here that needs to be addressed. Yeah, the thumbs are going up on that one. So an emotion of justice. It's kind of a call, a little bit of a call to action. And then this one's interesting. Carrie Howells, who's written about resentment, says it's the conceptual opposite of gratitude. So it's kind of holding on to an absence of something, where gratitude is like really focusing on what's present, what's plentiful, what's bountiful. Resentment is really focusing on the absence, the empty space. So, okay, resentment is a symptom. So certainly when we are talking about an uneven playing field, an unequal playing field. It is, it is a symptom that, and we'll talk in a moment about how the treatment for resentment is going to be a blend of acceptance and change, right? Sometimes in the face of resentment, what has to happen is change. Things have to change in order for this to be sustainable, in order for my resentment to dissolve. But I want to also challenge us to hold on to the idea that sometimes we transform resentment through acceptance, through standing in a different position, through looking at things a bit differently, which is not like rose-colored glasses, turning a blind eye to injustice, but it is a little bit of, I'm going to kind of stretch us a little bit into holding on to some both and. So we'll see how we do with it. But resentment's a symptom. It is telling us something is off. We have to look at it systemically. It lives in one partner, but it has something to say to both partners. This reminds me of when like the Gottmans will say, like, if you have a problem, we have a problem. Like that is one of the qualities in a thriving relationship, is if it's a problem for you, it's a problem for us. Like that's a reflection of trust. I trust you enough to say, when you bring me a problem, that it is a problem for you, that you're not doing it in order to, that you're not manipulating me in quotes. But if you're saying it's a problem, I trust you, and therefore your problem now is a we problem. So that's how I want our couples to be holding resentment. Like, I'm feeling resentful. Shit, you're feeling resentful? Okay. Resentment is a symptom. Resentment is systemic. We got to look together at what's going on. Don't know yet if it's a change or an acceptance or a blend of both. But if what you're telling me is you've got some resentment, we got to work on it together. And that moves it again, just like we did with pace discrepancy, where we move from you're needy, you're avoidant. We're moving it from you can't let anything go, you're not showing up for me, to a we issue, right? Because the one who's feeling resentful is saying, you're not doing this enough. You never, you don't, you're not showing up. I'm putting in more effort. I'm this. And the non-resentful partner is saying, you just can't let anything go. Nothing's ever enough for you, right? That's the sort of cyclical, the way this can take off or take on a life of its own. And all that pattern does is fuel the resentment. The more I'm saying, you're not doing enough, you're not showing up enough, the more you're going to say, you're so demanding, nothing's ever enough. Look at all of what I'm doing. You can't let it go. And now, we're lost in that cycle. So we're moving from that. So by saying that resentment is a systemic symptom, we're kind of helping the couple not get lost in that that kind of like polarized cycle. Actually, it's not really you're not doing enough, you never let it go. It's that there's a problem here. Something is off. We don't know yet what's off, but we know that when resentment shows up, we got to look at the whole, we got to look at the whole shebang. Something's amiss regarding our agreements, our priorities, our values, our expectations, our boundaries, our priorities again. Okay. So we transform resentment, or at least soften the edges of it or address it through a blend of acceptance and change. So it may be that what you do is you really help your couple create and or reimagine their agreements, right? And so for that, I'm going to refer you, where the heck else would I refer you besides Eve Brodsky's work, right? For Fair Play. She was at Psychotherapy Networker last year. I think she did a workshop with Dr. Tracy. Her Fair Play book, Fair Play documentary, Fair Play card deck. It's a really powerful, helpful, pragmatic system to surface, imbalances in domestic labor, which certainly the research is crystal clear that for cis hetero couples, imbalances in domestic labor and mental load, it's just like the data is screaming at us that there's a massive difference between men and women. I think what's oftentimes super confusing for men is that they oftentimes are doing so much more than their fathers, so much more than their grandfathers. But that just really speaks to how incredibly imbalanced it's been, that you can be doing that much better than your grandpa, that much better than your dad, and things are still imbalanced. That just speaks to the power and ubiquity of patriarchy. So, that is, I think there's lots of couples where that needs to be revisited. And I think it's not like a victim blaming thing. I think women, we are taught from a very early age to regulate our own sense of self-esteem and self-worth based on how our home looks, our cooking, how our partners are, dressed, what they're wearing, what they're eating, how they're being cared for, their health status. Like there's so much that is what we've internalized about being a good partner, a good girlfriend, a good fiance, a good wife, a good mother, is about how the things around you and the people around you are put together. So it may be that he has as hard a time stepping up as she has letting go, because in order to get him to step up, she's going to have to let go. And he may not do it like she does it. And she now has to have other ways of stabilizing her self-worth besides, how darling her kitchen looks or how organized her pantry is. Okay. I like that topic. But we shall move on. But I think, when you're doing that work with individuals and couples, you gotta just kind of like, be careful and not get lost in all of the stories, but just kind of create agreements. And when you've got one partner stepping up, you got to help the other one step back. And by the way, queer couples also struggle with inequities, right? Oftentimes it is based on income, like income still can kind of rule the day, or it's around gender socialization, like which partner, sort of how partners occupy, identify with, and manifest masculinity and femininity. They can start looking an awful lot like a cis hetero couple as well. And so that work needs to be done and attended to as well. Okay. I also love Dr. Lauren Fogel-Mercy and Dr. Jennifer Vensel's new book, which is called Desire, which is about desire discrepancies, libido differences, which we're certainly not going to have time to talk about today. But there again, resentment can come from, I'm the one who's always initiating. Resentment can come from, I feel like, every time you brush against me in the kitchen, you're asking me to have sex with you. And I resent that. So resentment around sexuality, around desire differences, around how we talk about or communicate our interest, or how we communicate our not available, our lack of availability, our lack of interest for right now, gets loaded up and can fuel resentment. So I think they just have written a book that is so good, so practical, so inclusive. Oh, it's so good. Actually, they're the guests on tomorrow's episode of Reimagining Love. That's another great resource. I refer you to that. Okay. Expectations. I think so often couples stumble into resentment because they come into relationship with expectations, but expectations we're not even aware we had an expectation. Sometimes the only way I know that I had an expectation is the moment you don't meet the expectation. Like, I don't even know I had an expectation until you didn't meet it, right? In the space between what I expected and what I got was when the light bulb went on. I was like, I had an expectation there. So can I be humble enough to know that sometimes we are not aware of the things we expect until other people don't meet those expectations? And then the goal is to say, wow, I had an expectation there. I wasn't aware of it. I am aware of it now. I'm going to speak it, right? And I'm going to check in with you about how feasible it is. That's the process. Become aware of it, speak it, discuss the degree to which it's reasonable or unreasonable, realistic versus unrealistic. So we also like our expectations to be spoken. And sometimes this also trips us up, doesn't it? Because we say things like, if I have to ask for it, I don't even want it. I shouldn't have to ask for it. Okay, well, yes, it is very hard to be vulnerable. None of us likes to put ourselves out there. If we have earlier relationship trauma, then sometimes our needs were used against us. It is in the asking that power flowed into somebody else's hands. And if that power was mishandled, then it's hella scary to even think of doing that again, of asking again, of risking again. And that's exactly what we have to do in baby steps, in micro doses, while our partner says, look at you, speaking your expectations into a voice. That's really brave. I'm not going to retaliate the way that your ex did or your parents did. So unspoken to spoken. And then unrealistic to realistic. The asterisk there is, I don't love the word realistic, but I got to think of a different word. And I didn't for this time. So I got an asterisk. Because realistic implies that there is something objective. Maybe it's reasonable. We want our expectations of ourselves and each other to be reasonable. But even reasonable has that tinge of like, who is the arbiter of it? Feasible, possible, right? Like if I expect something from you that is on an order that you can't deliver, we have a problem because I'm going to be disappointed. You're going to feel like you're underperforming, but maybe it ought to have been something where it shouldn't have gotten agreed to, right? So we have to be careful that you don't just smile and nod as part of you on the inside is like, oh shit, I don't think I can do that for her. I think I'm swearing more towards the end, aren't I? I'm kidding. We're past my appropriateness. We have to be careful that if I ask you for something and it is not feasible, reasonable, cannot be done without you becoming resentful to me, you are doing neither of us a favor by smiling and nodding while you tighten up on the inside. So that's, I guess, what I'm trying to capture there about realistic. Like when I ask you, if you cannot with an open heart provide that, or you're really worried about over-promising and under-delivering, then do us both a favor by saying that back to me, right? Set us both up for success by saying, oh, I love it. I love that you want it. I can see why you want it. And my worst case scenario here is that I promise something I'm not going to be able to deliver on. Okay, back to the drawing table. What else is it? It may be that I ask for something smaller or less frequent, or I take this need to somebody else in my life, or I figure out how to give most of this need to myself and only ask you for part of it, whatever. Okay. I think sometimes, here's where you might get mad. We've done so well together. Am I going to drive you away at this late hour? I think sometimes relational resentment is a mirroring process. I think sometimes if I'm resenting you, it's because I feel envious of a kind of liberation that you seem to be living with that I can only imagine of myself having. I think this is, we'll see if you get mad at me. I think sometimes you are mirroring something to me, an unexpressed part of myself, a way of being in the world that I've never given myself permission to have, or the world's never given me permission to have, or a prior partner didn't give me permission to have. So what I resent in you, I'm seeing more thumbs up than thumbs down. Oh, a clap. Okay, there's one O face, and that person might be mad. So I think listen for this. So many ups. Okay, fine. We like this and we're still friends. The way you as a therapist listen for this is it kind of sounds, I'm the client, you're my therapist. If I'm telling you how resentful I am of my partner, I'm saying things like, can you believe? Or how can they? Or it's like they don't even care, right? Like it kind of has this like sort of audacity, exasperated audacity to it. Like, can you even, like a huff, there's almost like a huff in saying it. So you as my therapist are definitely, one of your hypotheses is that my partner needs to step it the hell up, right? That they really are not giving in the way they ought to, that there's an imbalance here, that there's a lack here. But if you hear my kind of audacity and I'm trying to convince you, how could they, why don't they, keep open. One of your hypotheses ought to be, is there an envy or a judgment I'm making because of a kind of liberation my partner has? And that might be a liberation because the world has liberated him, but it might be that there's something inside of me, right? A way in which I haven't even ever imagined that kind of liberation for myself. So could you, as my therapist, help me step into, unhook myself from some story, right? Could I have a bit more freedom and ease? Could I start to look a bit more like my partner in this area, right? Is that maybe what this resentment is signaling? Is that there's something I could maybe learn from my partner's way of being? Okay, all right. Intervention would be we'll keep you as my therapist in this moment. You would ask me a constraint question. What keeps you from giving yourself a Saturday afternoon nap? What keeps you from giving yourself, an hour or two to call your mom back? What keeps you from, right? That kind of constraint question. The way your partner does. Then it's the remote block operation question. Okay, that remote block operation is from integrative systemic therapy. It's like, when is a time in the past that you felt this, sort of tying the present moment to the past? What does this dynamic remind you of? What feels familiar here, right? You're asking me to look, we're going to look together at what are the ghosts in the room? What is this familiar? When's another time that you, Alexandra, felt like, can you believe they did this? Because maybe there was a time in my past where there really was can you believe my dad would just walk out the door like that? But that's not what this is, right? This moment, this can you believe, this audacity that I have in this moment with my partner is being amplified for me because it's connecting me to a prior pain. It's not what this moment with my partner is about, but it sure as heck feels to a part of me like it's that old abandonment thing once again. The leverage question. You're asking me, Alexandra, what might you be able to learn from your partner's attitude, from your partner's approach? What could you learn here? And then if you went to the Psychotherapy Network or Couples Conference, you went to my talk there, I was talking about ambition and intimacy, kind of like this work talk that I did. And I introduced this idea of like the power couple potential. If every couple is a system, there's like the gnarly aspect of the negative interaction patterns. But for every negative interaction pattern, I think we could find a power couple potential, the way in which this difference between the two of you actually could be leveraged and utilized and finessed into something really powerful. As the Indigo girls would say, multiplying life by the power of two. So here's the question that you're asking me, because I'm resentful and I'm like, can you believe my partner and how could they? And you're saying to me, okay, thought experiment, Alexandra. How do the two of you benefit as a couple from having one of you respond the way that they respond while you respond the way you respond? What's the benefit? Just a thought experiment, right? Like you're doing it with maybe some humor, with a ton of empathy. You're leveraging our strong alliance to ask me to just imagine that there's actually a benefit to having one person who responds like that while I respond like this. Okay. Last. The step up. So final reminders on relational resentment. So when you're asking to make changes to the system, when you're asking, if you're going to ask one partner to step up, you have to have the other partner step back, right? If like around sexual initiation, if partner A wants partner B to initiate, partner A has to back up. And in fact, it may be the process of partner A backing up that actually kind of sparks a little bit of interest in partner B. Like, oh, they're not super available right now. I got to work for it a little bit, right? That step up, step back. Help your couple make their appreciation explicit, because remember that gratitude is the antidote to resentment. So even our resentful partner, can we challenge our resentful partner a little bit to notice the effort, the little effort, even if it's a C+, if you are explicit with your appreciation about the C+, and the next time you might get a B-. And if you're explicit about loving the B-, the next time you might get a B, right? So can we challenge our resentful partner to just stretch into some appreciation? This is a big one. When we've got a resentful partner, it tends to be if you think about like a relationship happening across multiple domains, sexual, domestic labor, leisure time, money. I don't know, you can probably come up with 10 of them. I'm most likely to feel resentful in the domain where I perceive myself as overperforming or over functioning, right? It's around sex. I'm always the one who initiates. I'm always, getting a little bit of creativity going. I'm always. So what might help soften the edges of my resentment is if I widen my lens and I looked across domains, I could see, oh, wow, my partner actually is the one who takes a lot of initiative around making plans with friends. We would never see other couples if I was left to my own devices because I'm more introverted or I'm thinking about sex. We wouldn't see our friends. So thank goodness my partner is the one who's got that domain covered. So that can soften, right? Because we get myopic around the domain where we're doing all of the giving and performing. So challenge your resentful client to just look a bit more broadly across the relationship domains. Say thank you instead of I'm sorry. So, when I get the thing I've asked for, can I just say thank you rather than saying I'm sorry I made you do that, or I'm sorry I wanted that. No, just thank you. Thank you for doing that. View the relationship in chapters and make agreements. Whatever worked before you moved in together probably has to get refigured after you've moved in together and after a baby. So looking again and again at agreements over time. And then, periodic check-ins about how are we doing around this tweak, reflect that we've made an agreement. It's not like an ultimatum. So if we've agreed that we're going to try and do this differently, if we've agreed to make a change in this area, let's agree to check in on it in 3 months. That's an agreement we make to check in about it. That's not an ultimatum. It's not like, if it's not perfect in 3 months, I'm out of here. It's saying, let's put a time on the calendar to follow up and see how we're doing. How are you feeling? How am I feeling? Because it's an agreement we're making rather than, if you don't and if I don't. Okay, 2 episodes of Reimagining Love for you. One about pace discrepancies, one about resentment. They're linked in your handouts. And there's how you're going to keep in touch with me. And so we've got time for questions. So I'm going to see if I can. Thank you for the hearts. Oh, I'm going to maybe stop the screen share. Do you have this information? Are you good? Oh my God, there's 1,200 of you here. That's so exciting. That's really exciting. Okay. All right, last chance. Oh, last chance on this. You know how to find me. I'm very easy to find. And you've got handouts. Okay, I think I can do it now, right? Questions. Oh, I know. I dragged it all the way down here. Okay. Yeah, if you gotta go. But if you can stay, I will do, about 12 minutes of questions. Okay, so I'm going to say that you have upvoted some of these. Okay, I don't think I did Laura Bloom's. Laura Bloom said, can you talk to clients with relational trauma who remain in partnerships that may be exacerbating their trauma, their attachment trauma? If it's not just exacerbating, but a toxic relationship, would you ever provide more direct education, encouraging leaving versus meeting a client where they're at and supporting them? Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about how, we did in the last round of Q&A, I was talking a lot about like the multilateral partiality and kind of keeping a benign to neutral view of the partner. It's not always going to be that case, right? So Laura's talking about like when either the couple is there and it's, very clearly highly dysfunctional, or you have enough data points to know that there's something really dysfunctional going on here. One thing that I will do is just like, thank you for the 1 millionth time to the Gottmans. I mean, the Gottmans have given us a playbook for what unhealthy dynamics look like in relationships, right? I mean, they've developed like mathematical modeling where you can predict with 93% accuracy who is going to get divorced, right? So it's the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So I rely heavily on the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Lord help me if they ever go astray or we're not able to use them anymore. Because what I'm doing is it's not me. I think one of the risks here is if I'm the individual therapist here and I'm saying to the client, this relationship is toxic. You got to go. I'm basically inviting them. I'm inviting them to hold we're going to split the ambivalence, right? My client's ambivalent because my client is saying to me, there's a problem here. I don't know if it's worth it. I just don't know. It's, I'm not feeling great in this relationship. The client is ambivalent. The client is not sure what to do. But if I come in hot and fast or hot and heavy, and I say, toxic, you got to go, I'm holding one part of the ambivalence, and just based on Newton's whatever law of physics, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? So by me coming down hard on go, you have to, if not, I'm inviting my client to hold the other part. Yeah, but you don't understand. I think it's going to be okay, or I think it's getting better, or maybe I'm overreacting, or maybe it's just me, right? So for one, that's one reason why I'm cautious to come in hard, especially with words like toxic or you have to, because it may be pretty ineffective and inefficient versus creating a space where I'm helping hold the two parts of the ambivalence and really seeding that part of my client who knows, right? That kind of inner knowing that this isn't sustainable, that there's too much, self-abandonment to make this sustainable. So that's one point. And then back to the reason I brought the 4 horsemen up is rather than me saying, as Alexandra, this is toxic, what I can say is I want to share with you something that we know from the research. When you tell me that story about that fight, what I want to highlight for you, let's look together at what the research has found to be really quite unsustainable patterns in relationships. And this is called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Let's talk through what the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are, and let's look at the degree to which they're manifesting themselves in your relationship, right? And it's criticism, you always, you never. It's defensiveness, that's the yes, but, and the big kind of X, like no feedback is welcome here, no conversation is welcome here. Criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, that's just the blank stare, that kind of like lights are on and nobody's home. And then contempt, which is the sneer, like the just not holding your partner in warm regard. And so by talking about those 4 horsemen, we're providing psychoeducation, right? Because our client may not have a template of healthy versus unhealthy, not that it's binary, may not even have a spectrum. If we call it a binary or a spectrum, our client may not have that kind of vision of what thriving, of what stability, of what security looks and feels like. So we're providing that, and we're providing it from a kind of educational way, at least at first, because that's less threatening, less personal. I think there can also be a lot of shame for staying in something that one knows isn't healthy. So a therapist who comes in hot around, like it's the kind of, who's got a lot of energy around the urgency can fuel shame, and shame can keep us feeling stuck. Shame makes us feel like we don't have a whole hell of a lot of agency. And so again, it may make it harder than if our client's got a lot of shame to tap into the part that actually wants something different and more vibrant than what they have. So it's another reason why I like the kind of psychoeducation, research-based, here's some signs and symptoms of, relationships that really maybe ought to be wrapped up. What do you think? Let's look at the list together. Things like we can triangulate in something that's a bit more neutral than that. I think is probably going to be more effective and efficient. Okay, Laura, I hope that gave you what you were wanting. Okay, Tristan Christoph says, when working with affairs and helping couples through that, do you take a different approach or use more tools? Yeah, I don't love anything about infidelity, but I do love to educate therapists on working with infidelity. I created an e-course, like a self-guided e-course that is for couples where there's been infidelity or a breach of trust. And the e-course is one that couples would take when they're kind of like at that crossroads of figuring out, are we going to try and rebuild or not rebuild? And it's not a replacement to couples therapy. I think couples therapy really is what's needed, at least in part. I think there's a number of things that are needed. I think the person who cheated needs individual therapy. I think the person who was cheated on needs individual therapy. And at some point, the relationship will need a restorative, systemic voice. But I also think and believe and have seen and know the research shows that healing from infidelity is possible. It's predicated upon, one of the things that Sue Johnson found in her research is that the biggest predictor, the kind of make or break, is the degree to which the one who cheated can really stay open-hearted, her ARE, accessible, responsive, and engaged. Can the person who cheated stay accessible, responsive, and engaged in the face of their betrayed partner's anger, confusion, frustration, stuckness, activation? And if that's the case, if we have a partner who cheated, who transgressed, who is willing to kind of hold up the mirror and look at all of what set them up for that, the ways in which prior family of origin wounds, relational pain, if they're willing to do that work while also staying available to their partner, then, I think there can be a journey of healing. I think everything we talked about today, I think the things we've worked on today are in the mix, but in the early stages post infidelity, you're on anything but an even playing field, right? The scales are tilted towards tending to the pain of the person who was betrayed. And that is because you've got to have stability first and foremost. You've got to create stability from which the couple then is going to decide whether they're going to try to repair or not repair. But it's really hard to do that when there's without some kind of stability. So the first order of business is helping the partner who was betrayed kind of deal with the ruminative thoughts. There's research that's shown that up to 70% of people who've been cheated on meet the criteria for PTSD. So you're doing a lot of just working on hydration and nutrition and sleep and movement and social support, kind of that basic first aid. So in that way, Tristan, that in the early phase, you may not be able to use a pure, golden equation of love because we're in a 90-10, not a 50-50, because we really do have to make sure our betrayed partner is well-resourced and well-nourished. We've got to make sure that our partner who did harm, is holding themselves with compassion, because all of us are more than our shitty behavior, or our thoughtless behavior, or our poorly boundaried impulsive behavior, right? That's not the sum total of who that person is. So as a therapist, my job to hold that partner, the one who betrayed, hold them in warm enough regard that they can stay present to their partner's pain. So long way of saying that there are certainly elements that we worked on today. And certainly as the therapy progresses, you are moving into something that's more relational, more equal. Usually it is the dealing with the crisis of infidelity. Then the later phase is looking at what were the relational pieces that maybe made this, what were the fault lines or the cracks or the risk factors this couple had, going into it. But that's not really where we start, because that starts to feel quite victim blaming. Okay. We did it, you guys. We did it. It's 4:17. We're done. I wish we were in one room together, of course, but I have loved your little emojis all afternoon. I have loved your presence hanging in there with me. I'm eager. I love feedback. Feedback is my love language. So let me know. Let me know how the articles are, the handout, the slide deck, questions we didn't get to. I'm going to ask to provide me with all these questions, and then you'll maybe see them in later content that we do down the road. But keep in touch. And thank you so much for spending the time, for valuing this work. Really, truly, I appreciate it. Thank you, Pessy.